Cause liberal denial's such a lofty ataraxia, where morals take a backseat, not up in the cab, but in hidden panels made by federal human traffickers. If you trust the autopilot, then you're just a sleeping passenger, passively accepting that it isn't us the bastards serve, making peace with all the evil walking on this rancid earth, seeking unity with those who bound your hands at birth, glancing up at fascists on a bloody dais thinking they just need a push. Not a holy man, but I'm praying for a burning bush. Yeah, I know you'd love to look away, but love, you need to look. There are many massacres the country manufactured that will never make the books. Now here's your fucking hook.
It looks to me as though you learned to love your prison. I guess you'd say you made it your own. Who knew that freedom's such a difficult decision? I bet you finally feel like you're home.
Home on the range of excuses. Justify some fracking, water down pollution, paint a fresh coat of bipartisan charm over backroom collusion. Your consent is being manufactured by illusions, marketing executives in federal seclusion, working day and night to keep you just the side of lucid, and too beat down for calling out abuses. So fuck all these progressives who can speak on revolution once they empty all your powder out and spit on all your fuses. I prefer to judge a leader not by quality of tweets, but the six-figure book deals she chooses, donors he betrays, and donors that he'd gladly take a bullet before he refuses, slogans he reuses, buzzwords he produces, then he spews like mucus. Well, two can play at that. So here's the inner dialogue of every time I snap, and it's fine-tuned to ruthless, and saying politics are useless. Just a bunch of loose lips tweeting cute shit, power suits, taxpayer booze trips, bunker at the ready when the shoe flips, and there will be no news clips. There will just be
people still owe money. People still owe money. No.
It looks to me as though you learned to love your prison. I guess you'd say you made it your own. Who knew that freedom's such a difficult decision? I bet you finally feel like you're home. Home.
People still owe money. People still owe money.
Read my lips, brand new taxes, starving all the billionaires and neutering their Visa Maxes. Topple Congress off their axis, mobilize the homeless, give them axes, call it praxis. Chop a couple limbs off the legislative branches. We'll show you the difference between air as a human right and guaranteed oxygen access. Octogenarians who barely know what day it is are culling countless citizens while sitting on a dais made of ignorance that was built on the graves of the slaves made to labor for its self-declared significance. And all to build a Congress full of millionaires who make their fortunes insider trading while they shit on all the indigent. So I got a bone to pick with our leaders, and I'll start with the ligaments. Pick right through the muscle, dig the marrow out, and serve it to the unhoused millions living in their minivans or watching their belongings get evicted from their tenement. I have a dream where we breach the walls of Congress and just let them in. And what happens next will survive in only text, cause there won't be any evidence. There will only be that heavy kind of feeling that pervades a space where there has been a reckoning and you can feel its remnants. Let any man who enters seeking power know that those who came before him suffocated on their eminence. That there once was a seal on the wall, but we quartered it and scattered all the pieces that it might prevent its semblance. And so we end the great experiment. We'll take all your billions, leave you 2 coins for the ferryman. Leave you drifting on a Dutchman floating derelict among the wretched seraphim. For holy is the hand that wiped the land clean of those who pose as gentlemen. That's my time, honey, cue the thunderclap and strike the theremin. And so we end the great experiment. Give you 2 coins for the ferryman.
They'll gladly pay you by the hour for a minute or so, so you can sign off on the towers where they'll piss on your home. And if you feel like you're just powerless to answer them no, it's 'cause you are. They'll gladly pay you by the hour for a minute or so, so you can sign off on the towers where they'll piss on your home. And if you feel like you're just powerless to answer them no, it's 'cause you are. It's 'cause you are. They'll gladly stagnate a living wage, snap the chains, bury it. Labor slaves in rusty cages dragged behind a chariot, led by Mr. Racial Jungle, Joseph or Iscariot, fighting over scraps as they barrage us all with variants and BuzzFeed clickbait, straight until we're paralyzed, trying to distract us from the concentration camps that Joe had swore he'd close but only chose to amplify, where they got 50-something kids in cages made for 5 to occupy. And no, she hasn't seen the camps, but Harris swears they're paradise. She tells us the facilities are safe, and that right down to the women, they are regularly sterilized. Then she throws her head back and she proceeds to laugh that sort of heartless cackle you'd expect from someone working steadfastly on behalf of the virus and a Congress full of parasites. And where was I? I was busy cashing every blue check, demonstrating plainly all the narratives expected from the verified. I was busy breeding verbal leeches by the terabyte. Train them to exsanguinate the wealthy while they sleep at night. Bleed the oil barons dry and barren. Say they showed us how to share and now we share alike. Tell them I contracted rabies from a feral mic. Now I'm just another species losing sleep to noise pollution and these glaring lights. Forced to change its habits and adapt to just survive. But now it's safe to say that some of us are thriving in the moment, throwing shit on presidential homes beneath the Paris skies. So if you feel like you're just powerless, I guess you bought the lie. But I can tell they're petrified of our collective might, 'cause I can hear those gentrifiers weeping at the sight of our collective rights. And I only can imagine the intensifying fear of knowing revolution's near. And all that's left to do is simply wallow in the thick anticipation of a rabid bite. And baby, one day you can ask your leaders just what that was like before you grab a slice.
So if you think you're powerless, allow me now to change your mind. Honey, if you think you're powerless, allow me now to change your mind. See, they'll pay you hourly, tax them each apart, and build a shining tower out of loopholes and cards, and tell you that you're powerless to keep you in the dark, because you aren't, because we aren't. You see, they'll pay you hourly, tax them each apart, and make you build a shining tower out of loopholes and cards, where they'll tell you that you're powerless to keep you in the dark, because you aren't, because we aren't.
Wait, so if you don't trust the CIA or you don't trust like our institutions, then what do you trust? Wait, so if you don't trust the CIA or you don't trust like our institutions, then what do you trust?
The last track, I think I only blinked once. I skipped lunch. Blinked twice. Christ, shut your eyes. Now open wide. Fascists took the nation and inflation took a supersize. It's sad to say your teachers couldn't quite make the ends collide. But now you'll probably get to see them on the weekends doing Uber drives. Say lube it with a little oil. One, it tastes expensive too. You'd be surprised how well it helps you open up your throat so you consume the lie of human rights that was sold to you by suits and ties, designer scents on plastic men with patient fangs and ancient vice. You know, the kind of greed that makes a person lose the sight of morals, so it's easier to sleep at night. It's easier to ease their minds and pick a foreign people we could demonize. If you take a sec to sink into how war criminals think, you'll know you'd never want to see inside. If every man's an open book to look within, theirs are bound in human skin and not designed for human eyes. They are wearing human skin, but they can simply not be humanized. They aren't worth the lowest of the poor they swore to crucify. Holy sweet Geneva, there's a mass grave full of dead believers you called the police on cause you don't believe in squatters' rights. You believe the sanctity of human life is relative to human worth in terms of work and dollar signs. So listen when I say you
have just an off-the-cuff chat between you and me. Us. We want to talk right down to earth in a language that everybody here can easily understand.
Who are these people?
It's us. We're these people.
I love that intro. I love that intro so much.
I'm here with a different co-host this time, Oz LaFave.
Hey guys, thanks so much for having me on.
Friend of the show, DJ Joe Nice. How are you, friend?
What's good?
And you hear Nick say this all the time. The United States is the most propagandized country in the world.
We are so fucked, you guys. Again, I'm sorry for being cynical, but seriously,
No.
we're fucked. We are
Right.
fucked. We are well and truly fucking fucked.
Just appreciate all the work that you do and the platforms that you all are providing.
Hey, you. Doing good. How are you guys doing?
And as independent media, we have a responsibility to be, we don't hide our bias, obviously, but we must stay true to the facts.
What's up, Pam?
Cheers and salutations. Smoke 'em if you got 'em.
But I am here with a man that I've been waiting to talk to for the last couple of years, Nico House.
As an educator, what I would suggest is that, first of all, podcasts like these are made.
So you need to be an example for the people and for the future, knowing that your words can actually change the future.
What do you feel? What would Kwame Ture feel we would have to do?
Well, politics is every day of every minute. You have to be aware of what's going on. Not voting on one day, so the vote has never meant anything. So I'm not a Democrat.
See, I would call that guy the Black Obama.
No. You know, the issues that we talk about, listen to us.
As always, kids, labels are bad. Stay independent. Good night, fam.
INN News.
What's up, everybody? It's another week. It's INN News. It's also a great day of what? Why at no work? Oh, because SoundPad isn't on. That would be the thing. It's Wednesday. How are you, Care Bear? You doing all right? My lovely co-host as always.
I'm doing all right.
Great.
Let's hope Discord cooperates.
Yes.
This week, although I did see, I think maybe last night it did update itself on my end, so hopefully that's what it takes to not have the freezing issues.
Speakers.
It is Wednesday, my dudes.
There we go. I got it.
Yeah,
I got it.
and yeah, we know you guys are probably not watching us right now. I'm sure a lot of you are watching our channels that are on right now.
Well, you're probably watching us on replay, so we appreciate you. Hopefully you're not doing something like watching electoral politics debates.
Right.
That I didn't know was happening either.
I only found out about the debate like 4 hours ago. So.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I am moving. I've been moved in. I just haven't bothered unboxing stuff yet.
He's been every once in a while I see another open box that he's gotten rid of. You know? Like,
let me live. It's only me who lives here, so
right.
But
Well,
the boxes will be gone one of these days.
one of these days they'll be gone.
I said that.
I mean, I just say you
I
get
said that
sponsored
year
by
ago.
Home Depot and we should be all right. You know, that in Cop City we should be okay. Anyway, appreciate our members. You'll see them scrolling by underneath here on YouTube and Patreon. We appreciate you. If you want to give us monetary support, we always appreciate it. Not that you have to. And you know, otherwise, like and share the screen. Ice cream. Stream? There we go. One of those are words. Don't worry, we're waking up. We're getting there. Yeah, like and share the stream. We appreciate that too. We brought some stories this week. You wanna get into them?
Yeah. So we're gonna read a Jewish sermon tonight. For some of our Jewish followers, and even if you're non-Jewish, the last week and a half is probably considered the most important days in the Jewish calendar, and it culminated on Monday with Yom Kippur, which is the Day of Atonement for the Jewish religion. And so
hopefully the
there's
congregation
a rabbi
brought their
that-
Torah, you know, so we can turn to chapter and verse.
So there's a rabbi who is based in Chicago. He actually, I think this sermon became his op-ed that he wrote in connection to Palestine, which I think is very interesting. And given, shout out to Indy, who is also Jewish, the things that he has said in terms of some of the sermons he has heard in Temple when he has gone, I think is very counter to this guy is actually kind of speaking more on the lines of what we've discussed as far as Palestine, which I think is kind of refreshing to hear. So we're going to get into that. And then we are going to talk about Cornel West, and it's not to say we generally do not talk about mainstream issues like this, but this is actually a Substack article that I just stumbled upon Monday night. And the author actually brought up some good points about Cornel that I think should be talked about, and I hope that anyone who in the independent media space who does interview him actually addresses some of the questions that this author actually brings up in the article. So, as I said, normally we don't talk about mainstream issues like that. We will, unless it relates to issues that we think is important. And I think this does relate to some of the stuff that we talked about on this show before.
Sure.
And then just continuing, not to kind of continue, but to kind of share a little bit more connection to the controversy I had on Twitter in regards to Peter Dow. What was that? 2 weeks ago, I guess now?
I think.
So, yeah, about that time. So, and then what you got, Reef?
I've got an interesting article put up by Declassified, Declassified UK, lovely little group over there doing stuff, about Kenya warning us of some bad mans. The men did bad. We'll get into that. UK Army is doing some terrible things as they are expected to do, and a article by Seymour Hersh as a follow-up to his last Nord Stream article. We'll get into what he says about that and the year of lying that has gone on since then. So that'll be interesting. I also brought that Jimmy talking to the UN about the Nord Stream, so we'll watch that. So,
right.
Yeah, that's what I brought. So I'm ready when you are.
Okay.
Let's go.
I'm ready. And these are kind of long. So,
yeah, so strap in, peeps.
So, as I said in our intro, the last few days are probably the most important time in the Jewish faith. It started with Rosh Hashanah, which is the Jewish New Year, which culminated on Monday with Yom Kippur, which is their Day of Atonement. So, for our non-Jewish followers who may not know what the hell is Yom Kippur, I'm going to show. Well, I'm not. Shout out to this YouTube channel, Bim Bam, who gives a very brief explanation as to what Yom Kippur is. So we will play that so you have a general understanding of Yom Kippur and how it relates to the sermon that we're going to get into later.
Yep.
So go ahead, Reef.
Yom Kippur is the holiest day of the year for the Jewish people. This is the time of year when most Jews show up for services, or at least more than usual. In big cities, you sometimes even need tickets. The place gets pretty crowded. To prepare, during the days before the holiday, people make amends and ask forgiveness from their family and friends, and then the day arrives. We learn, on this day you are to afflict your soul, and Yom Kippur makes atonement for you and all Jewish people. So, how do you afflict your soul? Famously by fasting from food and drink. There are other prohibitions too. No bathing, perfume, sex, or wearing leather. There's a lot of stuff you can't do. Fasting and praying, though, are not enough, as Yom Kippur demands that Jews also commit to changing their behavior. As it says in the Haftorah reading from the prophet Isaiah, an empty fast is not sufficient. This is the fast I desire, to share your bread with the hungry, to take care of the poor, to clothe the naked, and to not ignore our fellows. Traditionally, you spend the entire evening and next day at prayer services. There's many ways that people actually do this holiday. Some people create their own rituals, taking a contemplative walk, or fasting at home. Yom Kippur begins with a service just before sunset called Kol Nidre. You'll notice it's the one time a year where people wear a prayer shawl or talit at night, and many are dressed in white. Kol Nidre is a public apology in advance for failing to meet our own vows and admitting we're not perfect. The chanting of this stirring melody is the beginning of a marathon that ends 25 hours later. The evening, morning, and afternoon services that follow each contain special passages. Importantly, people chant confessions, called vidui, silently as well as out loud. Readers chant from Leviticus about the scapegoat ceremony that atoned for people's misdeeds, as well as the book of Jonah, about the prophet who ran away from God and eventually changed his ways. There's a memorial service called Yizkor. Yom Kippur is a time for relationship maintenance, requiring Jews to seek out reconciliation with others, with themselves, and with God. The imagery of the holiday is of gates, the gates of prayer, of soul-searching, and of forgiveness, which are closed at the final service, Ne'ilah, or locking of the gates. There's another metaphor, being written in the Book of Life on Rosh Hashanah and now being sealed in the very same book on Yom Kippur. You might hear people say, Gemar Chatima Tova, may you be sealed for a good new year. As Ne'ilah concludes, the shofar is sounded in a dramatic closing ceremony. With the final blast, the ups and downs of a really long day come to a full stop.
Quick, Gondor calls for aid.
Time to eat as Jews gather together for break the fast. Not breakfast, because it's at night. Like any good cleanse, Yom Kippur leaves you feeling wrung out like a sponge, having gone along a spiritual journey, refreshed and renewed, ready to begin again with a clean slate. Gemar Chatima Tova.
Okay. Cool.
So that's Yom Kippur in a nutshell. So basically, a very abbreviated version of Lent.
Yeah.
I would say, and then
Very similar, right?
for Christians, very similar in terms of like you're atoning for for yourself, for the sins of yourself, and then the sins of others. Like in your family or maybe in your neighborhood, city, country, whatever.
Yeah.
So to kind of going with that, this, as I said earlier, this was a sermon, but was taken as an op-ed on Truthout.
Gotcha.
And it was written by Brant Rosen, who is a rabbi at Checket's Chicago. And he's also a blogger and Palestinian activist.
Gotcha.
So he writes, on Yom Kippur, solidarity with Palestinians is a sacred act. Both words and actions matter. Lest you reject euphemisms, decree violence against Palestinians, and fight apartheid. So
Euphemisms.
the tin continues.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Thank you.
Right. Today, as Jewish communities across the world gather together for Yom Kippur's collective rituals of atonement, I am thinking about how, in Jewish tradition, words are said to have a sacred power. In the first chapter of the Torah, God creates the world itself through the power of speech. In the book of Exodus, the Israelites speak as one people at Sinai, thereby entering into a covenant with God. It is said that on Yom Kippur, the high priest would enter the Holy of Holies in the Jerusalem temple and utter the otherwise unspeakable name of God, and at that moment the fate of the very world hung in the balance. When we release our words into the world, sometimes we cannot see their effects, sometimes their power remains dormant. Other times, our words represent the crossing of a line from which we cannot return. That probably sounds like some of us on Twitter.
Yep.
As a rabbi of Tzedek, Chicago, a synagogue that explicitly opposes Israel's ongoing oppression of the Palestinian people, I think a great deal about the impact of our words when it comes to the issue of Israel-Palestine. We have witnessed the power of words, for instance, over the course of this past year, as thousands of Israelis have been holding regular demonstrations against the current Israeli administration and its plans to gut the power of the Israeli judiciary. Week after week, protesters chanted words in the streets and carried them on signs, voicing their collective outrage over the government's threat to Israeli democracy. More recently, many in the American Jewish community, including many rabbis, have voiced their support for these protests and have even begun staging public protests of their own. On one level, it could be said that these massive rallies have had a powerful impact. They are the largest and most sustained protests in Israeli history and the most massive mobilization of the Israeli left in years. The rhetoric of the rally has also empowered Zionists in general. Many who advocate for Israel will often refer to it as the only democracy in the Middle East. I would suggest that the use of this word is powerful for all the wrong reasons. It covers up the reality that while Israel may be democracy for Jews, it is decidedly not one for Palestinians. Indeed, for many centrist and right-wing Israelis, these demonstrations are important because they serve to entrench Zionism and strengthen the Jewish state.
Little Freudian white wing. Collin spit out, but that's okay.
Yeah. What?
Little Freudian white wing. White wing. Right wing. What? Something like that. Anyway.
It is true that at many of these demonstrations, there have been some chants and signs condemning Israel's occupation. However, this is an oft-invoked word that can mean different things to different people. For some, it refers only to Israel's military occupation of the West Bank and Gaza. For others, it also includes annexed territories such as the East Jerusalem and the Golan Heights. For still others, the entire land between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea is considered to be occupied territory. Thus, when the word occupation is invoked during the demonstrations, there is little clarity on what it actually means or what is actually being demanded. There is yet another powerful word that has recently emerged in relation to Israel-Palestine, and that word is apartheid. Last year, three respected human rights organizations, Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, and the Israeli group B'Tselem, all released well-researched reports concluding that Israel is an apartheid regime. Over the past year, many surprise figures have been increasingly using this word in relation to Israel, including a retired Israeli general. This past year, a letter was posted online by Israeli academics that openly criticized American Jews for paying insufficient attention to the elephant in the room, Israel's long-standing occupation. The letter pointedly stated that there cannot be democracy for Jews in Israel as long as Palestinians live under a regime of apartheid, as Israeli legal experts have described it. The so-called elephant in the room letter was widely distributed and eventually signed by Jewish leaders and figures. To date, it has over 2,700 signatures. It is very significant that liberal Jewish leaders are increasingly willing to use the A word in public. There is every indication that it is losing its stigmatized, transgressive status in the Jewish community. But even here, the meaning of the word apartheid depends on how it is used. The B'Tselem report, for instance, claims that Israeli apartheid extends from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea. The Israeli general, on the other hand, limited it to the West Bank alone. There are also those who would say that the term apartheid itself doesn't go far enough, that it is a technical term for international humanitarian law that has limited legal applications. Many argue that the word settler colonialism, is much more powerful because it is related to decolonization, a concrete process of action that includes the return of refugees and reparations to the Palestinian people. On Yom Kippur, Jewish people ourselves stand as a community and say the words of our collective confessions together. As our liturgy would have it, we may not be written into the book of life for the new year unless we speak these words out loud. In the face of Israeli apartheid and settler colonialism, what does it mean for us to speak the unspeakable in more ways than one? Can the liturgies of Yom Kippur embolden us not only to speak the unspeakable name of God, but also to other political truths that we, scroll down please.
Sorry.
But also to other political groups that we have been hiding from. Years ago, I used to avoid controversial and potentially incendiary words in connection with Israel, feeling that they might well alienate and push away the very people I was trying to reach. I would typically use the words I thought that were less triggering. Dispossession instead of ethnic cleansing, non-Zionist instead of anti-Zionist, occupation instead of settler colonialism.
Which is just self-censorship, pretty much.
I feel different about this now. I actually think it is important to use such words such as these. I believe it's important not to hide behind euphemisms, to name oppression explicitly. If some words make people uncomfortable, that's okay. Once a word is said, it can't be unsaid. It is now part of the discourse. While some may very well recoil from that word, they may come around to it to accept it in time. Words can indeed push the line of what is considered acceptable, but they can also represent one step too far or the crossing of a line. There is still, for instance, a hard line drawn on the word Zionism. For most Jews, it is still considered beyond the pale to refer to oneself as an anti-Zionist, to break not just with the Israeli government, not just with the 1967 occupation, but with the very concept of an exclusively Jewish nation state. In this way, it seems to me that when we say these words and cross this particular line openly, we're really making a kind of confession. It's not merely a political opinion. It's a public admission that our Jewish identity has been inextricably connected to the oppression of another people. When I was growing up, I was routinely taught that Zionism was a national liberation movement for the Jewish people. But I was never taught that in this liberation came at the expense of another people. Like many American Jews, I was raised to view the establishment of the State of Israel as the exclusive Jewish homeland, a Jewish refuge after centuries of persecution, a redemptive homecoming following the collective trauma of the Holocaust. That trauma is compounded by the sense that the world was complicit in it, that the Jewish people were abandoned by the international community. To be sure, the Allied nations should rightly bear deep shame for its inaction during the Holocaust and its refusal to accept Jewish refugees following the war. But even as our Jewish trauma is all too real, it was tragic and profoundly wrong to justify it by inflicting trauma on another people, to establish a Jewish state on the backs and create what has now become the largest refugee population in the world.
Yep.
When Jewish Zionists publicly confess and act on the truth of this history, it can often shake their Jewish identity to the core. This phenomenon often reminds me of something James Baldwin wrote in his classic 1962 essay, A Letter to My Nephew. So actually, we're going to listen to it instead of
Great.
read it. So it's
Love
not his
James
voice.
Baldwin.
So if you want to play the next slide, and we have a time to where we have wants to read it.
But as you will discover, people find it very difficult to act on what they know. To act is to be committed, and to be committed is to be in danger. In this case, the danger in the minds of most white Americans is the loss of their identity. Try to imagine how you would feel if you woke up one morning to find the sun shining and all the stars aflame. You would be frightened, because it is out of the order of nature. Any upheaval in the universe is terrifying because it so profoundly attacks one's sense of one's own
reality. Sorry, just cut off there.
It happens.
Though Baldwin was addressing white supremacy in the U.S., I think his words were equally applicable to Jewish supremacy in Israel. Zionism has become such a delectable part of Jewish identity that has caused us to enable, or at the very least tolerate, the oppression of another people. The power of this mythic Zionist narrative manages to keep truth on this ongoing oppression at bay, lest it causes everything we once held so dear to come crashing to the ground. Scroll down, please. I experienced this upheaval personally in 2008 at my former congregation. During Israel's military assault on Gaza, I experienced deep anguish, and I expressed those feelings in a blog post. While I had often been critical of Israel in the past, this was very different. Rather than using the usual words calling for balance and a plea for peace on both sides, I used strong and angry language, explicitly naming Israel as the oppressor. I concluded my post with these words. We good Jews are ready to protest oppression and human rights abuses anywhere in the world, but are all too willing to give Israel a pass. It's a fascinating double standard, and one I know all too well. I understand it because I've been just as responsible as anyone else for perpetuating it. So no more rationalizations. What Israel has been doing to the people of Gaza is an outrage. It has brought neither safety nor security to the people of Israel, and has wrought nothing but misery and tragedy upon the Palestinian people. There, I said it. Now what do I do? Now, many years later, I realized that post was a kind of confession. Though I didn't know it at the time, even when I wrote those words, I was actually crossing a line that would eventually force me to leave my congregation. To use Baldwin's words, it was upheaval so profound that it attacked my sense of my own reality. I was fairly sure I couldn't continue as a congregational rabbi, and I wasn't completely sure what kind of Jew I would be either. But once our words are out into the world, there are myriad ways their power might be manifested. I was eventually able to recover my Jewish identity along with my Jewish conscience. Speaking those words was unexpectedly liberating. I discovered there were other Jews like me, lots and lots of them, and together we became part of an emergent Jewish community that had the freedom to say out loud what must be said. I have no illusions that there is a distinct minority of Jews on this side of the line, but I also know that there are many who are now crossing over, breaking their silence on Israel-Palestine in unprecedented ways. The new Jewish community that I'm a part of is creating a new counter-narrative to the Zionist narrative that has been dominant for so long. One critical part of this counter-narrative is the understanding that standing in solidarity with Palestinians is a mitzvah, a sacred act. Those who engage in solidarity with disenfranchised people know that while words may have great power, words can
Great power has great responsibility. Sorry, Uncle Ben? No? Okay.
Yeah.
Words
Words can quickly
power comes great responsibility. Yeah. Anyway.
Those who engage in solidarity with disenfranchised people know that while words may have great power, words can quickly lose their power if they do not lead to action. Indeed, history is littered with the portrayal of empty words, promises unkept, and treaties broken. It can often be a challenge to those who are trying to practice solidarity in good faith. The growing popularity of land acknowledgements is significant and important, but as many Native people have pointed out, they amount to empty words unless they attain accountability, unless they exist in a larger context of decolonization and reparation. As President Robert Larson of the Lower Sioux Indian community has put it, an apology or an acknowledgement is one thing, but what are you going to do next? The same applies to those who are expressing solidarity with the Palestinian people. Yes, the words we say matter, but unless they lead to genuine transformation, they will remain little more than empty words. Words represent the initial spark, but once kindled, it takes real effort to sustain and increase its power. We must take active responsibility to maintain that initial spark. Otherwise, it will eventually sputter out. Putting our words of solidarity with Palestinians into action can take many forms, but a core priority requested by Palestinian civil society groups is support for BDS, the Palestinian-led boycott, divestment, sanctions movement. I invite any Truth Out readers who are interested to attend a free online Yom Kippur conversation. Actually, it happened
a couple days ago. Yeah.
With Amar Bagoti, the co-founder of the BDS National Committee, who will be talking about repentance, reparation, and ethical reconciliation, a Palestinian vision for common liberation. and readers of all faith communities can organize their religious institutions, sign a pledge from the Apartheid-Free Communities Initiative, a newly created interfaith coalition convened by the American Friends Services Committee. In that statement, signatories pledge to join others in working to end all support to Israel's apartheid regime, settler colonialism, and military occupation. Signing a public pledge like this helps grow our courage to speak unspeakable truths and struggle to live out these words as a community. In the sacrament service, the Jewish morning prayer, we say the words Baruch She'amah V'Ahavat Alom. Sorry, I got that wrong, but not Hebrew. Blessed is the one who spoke and the world became. While this literally refers to God, it is also a statement about the potential within each and every one of us. Our words have the power to transform our lives and our world, indeed, to create whole worlds anew. So on this day, I offer this as a collective blessing to challenge us all. Let us find the courage to speak the words that must be spoken. Let our words kindle the sparks of possibility, and may they inspire us to create the world we know is possible. A world of justice, repair, and wholeness for all who dwell on earth.
Sounds familiar?
Yeah.
You ever watch Dune?
Doom?
Dune.
Oh,
D-U-N-E.
Dune. No.
Okay. You should watch the original. I'm gonna be a little nerdy with Dune. I mean, you should also read the book. But it's essentially space Palestine. For the most part. For lack of a better analogy here. But words literally have power in Dune. Right? Right. Like Muad'Dib becomes a killing word, right? And it's based off this premise that words have power in Judaism, right? And that the Palestinians then taking the word become even greater, right? It's weird and complicated, but what happened? Oh, you must have froze?
Yep.
Okay. Well, let's fix that then. On Discord, what are we doing? But yeah, it's weird sci-fi analogy for this, but I mean it took them having a violent uprising to get their power. So but they had little laser beams that if you said the right word, things blew up. So, fun times. And spice controls the universe and all that. I'm surprised you haven't watched this, Collin. It's good. David Lynch.
I don't watch anything.
They recently had one. What does the new one have in it? Zendaya. I think Zendaya's in the new one.
Timothy
Chalamet,
I think is in the new one. Yeah.
Yeah. I heard it's not bad either, but yeah. Soul Construct in the chat. The spice was Flow, Collin. He who controls the spice. Dude, the original one, the other one people should watch is Jodorowsky's Dune, which it's a documentary on. They were going to make Dune before David Lynch made Dune, right? And they had Giger was doing artwork for it. They were gonna have Mick Jagger was gonna be in it. It was weird. But yeah, Dune's an interesting book when you get into it. Ton of weird lore. But yeah, it's space Palestine, so I felt like it applies. We were talking about words have power.
Yeah.
But
as Brant stated, words have power, but you have to apply them to action. And I think, and you can make this connection really to anything, but I think especially that we have more political discussions on this show. Mostly, you can definitely make that. It goes without saying, we talk about this all the time, how many of our politicians just have empty rhetoric in terms of the things that they say that they're going to do or how they're going to change the world, and then they don't necessarily back that up with the action, or at least the action that they do is very tepid.
You said do.
They're not very forceful in their actions necessarily.
Right.
And but you can also see it, and I said it on Twitter. Twitter is a lot of noise, and it's true. It is a lot of noise, and I don't want to say very few, because I'm sure there are a lot of people who are taking actions in different ways. But I think an independent media is accustomed to the fact that, these people just sit behind their, computer screens and basically dictate to people what they should know, what should they be doing while they sit in their ass. And, I could say for me, I do this once a week, and for all intents and purposes right now, I can only afford to do it once a week because I have a job and stuff like organizing that I do here that actually takes up more of my time than doing this. So if I'm actually doing the work within my job and then outside of work, that causes me not to do this every waking moment. So I like to think I kind of practice what I preach in terms of in the way that I do it. I want to inspire others to kind of do it, which is
speaking of preaching. This seems very similar to me to like king stuff, where we have to take the word of the oppressor and like actually reanalyze it to suit our own needs. Like in the word of the Bible, right? As similar to a lot of like Black liberation stuff, we're using that kind of stuff. But it was just an interesting like recontrol that narrative as well as all the other narratives we have to like retake.
Right. Right. But the thing is, here's the thing with the Bible. Well, here's the thing with any of these ancient books.
Yes.
And like
they are open to interpretation.
They're open to interpretation, but within that interpretation, you have to understand, first of all, the Bible as we know it now, and I'm just using that because I grew up in the Christian faith.
Yeah.
And I studied this in high school and college. It was written to be read out loud, number one. So a lot of what we get from the Bible was actually oral, number one. It was actually, and two, they were written for certain audiences of that time. So like, I think the letters of Paul are a good example. Like, they were often like, and for many of those letters, he wrote them in jail. So he would ship off his letters to whatever community that he was speaking to or was supposed to speak to, and kind of use their suffering or their oppression as the basis of, their empowerment, essentially. So you have to kind of look at it in the context of the time, and then, and then the audience of whom essentially this oral tradition was spoken
that was
to.
always my thing. I grew up here in the Bible Belt, right? So, that faith is definitely a big factor in local stuff, so but it was always shocking to me growing up how much they didn't know and understand in those teachings. So, we might switch to Zoom if that helps, but we can do that in a bit. But for me, I eventually became not part of that faith and religion as a whole, partially because of that,
Right.
Like, it gets bastardized, controlled, manipulated into something that it's not, so...
So, but that's not, and we've talked about this, and no, like, we've watched a lot of Kwame Ture that's spoken about this.
Yes.
It's not...
Malcolm.
Yeah, it's not,
I mean, all of them did, right?
It's not the religion in of itself. Well,
I mean, I'm more than willing to blame it.
The philosophy of the religion that's necessarily the problem. It's the culture of how we use it and perverse it. That's the problem. It's how we twist it. That's the problem. And and I appreciate with Brent, and we heard kind of a similar thing with Miko as well, how they had to kind of realize they had this epiphany in terms of seeing potentially within their faith this segregation slash elitist view
Yeah.
of their faith in terms of what they believed was owed to them due to their oppression, that they were willing to oppress others in the
Yeah.
name of, oh, this land was promised to us.
What's that?
And
There's a classic animation of where it speaks to that. I think it's literally called This Land. Uses that Sinatra track. Kind of goes, and it's super old too. I mean, it's like, I want to say it was like early 2000s that thing was done.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, just as a side note, I'm with the chat as far as religion's concerned. Not a fan overall.
Right.
But
I mean,
I get where it, like, there's a interesting discussion between Richard Dawkins and Stephen Fry and the Diocese of the Catholic Church at the time, where it's like, did the Catholic Church do more good than bad? And Stephen Fry and Hawkins knocked it out of the park. It was terrible. On top of your entire book is a lie, canonized by political leaders, so, but that was the thing I always found funny about religious people here, that the history of the religion they know nothing about, which I just find, like, are we going to talk about what is it? The schism, the Great Schism, where they're trying to figure out if the Trinity is a thing,
right?
Like, that's still a big factor,
right? And I was very fortunate because I went to a Catholic high school, so I had to learn this stuff anyway. But most people would not necessarily know that,
Right.
Or I would argue a lot of these pastors may not necessarily have that training or that biblical history to really understand that and really kind of make that application. Like, the idea of reading any ancient texts, such as the Bible or the Torah or the Quran, I would argue, is it was written for a certain audience and at a certain time. A lot of those things may not necessarily relate or connect to things that are happening now. So how can we best apply some of the practicalities of what they were doing then within a modern context now?
Yeah.
But there are often churches that are literally literal to the idea of everything in the Bible is gospel, literally, and then having to apply it as is, as what it said in the Bible.
Yeah, literal.
Without the consideration of the context, analyze it to understand the idea of who was spoken to and the practical application of what it would mean to apply it in today's world. So really,
no, I agree.
This should,
it's similar to how the Jewish faith has bastardized Judaism as well as all the other ones. Same thing with, the Wahhabism.
But I think that's more a unique problem within the West, given capitalism and then racism, by extension, racism.
It's much harder to bastardize things like Taoism and Shinto and things like that,
Right. But I would argue there's more of a purer sense of Christianity, at least from what I've seen in the global South, because you don't have the distractions of capitalism to really influence your thinking or kind of perverse your thinking in terms of when you read the Bible and you're kind of interpreting it from your our modern worldview, which often is related to capitalism. When you're in the global South, especially if you're the working poor, you don't have that as a crutch necessarily. So you're
Right.
able to kind of look, not to say in a way that they kind of look at things is even correct, but I'll say it's a lot more closer to what is actually, in my mind, actually lived out than how we probably do here in our capitalist society. So just
Well,
something
I'm
to
sure
kind
there's
of
going to
think.
be a lot of conversation about this segment. So, comments are down there if you want to hash it out. I'm sure there's some thoughts people would have. Make sure to like and subscribe too while you're there. The buttons are right down there while you're scrolling past them. But anyway.
But I do appreciate before we go into the next segment, I do appreciate Brant's vulnerability here in terms of kind of admitting, he basically told his life story in the sermon, just being like, when I made the realization of what I was doing and how I was hurting another community in terms of uplifting his.
Yeah.
Then he realized that he needed to make a turn, which was very difficult, but he found community out of that. And I think very fortunate that he's able now to lead a temple now that promotes having solidarity with Palestinians. And even as we know, like Indy has had private conversations with us, that's not necessarily the case in many temples in this country, that they kind of promote a lot of the Zionist viewpoints.
Yeah.
That I think really kind of stifle a lot, I think, of what it means to be Jewish, but I think in terms of kind of promoting this Zionist sentiment, that's still kind of pervasive within the faith. Well, I would argue across, I think just generally like in the Jewish faith, but you can also make that association within politics as well, translated into, I would argue, the Christian faith as well.
Right.
Given, the promise of this sacred land that also has its ties to Christianity as well. So, I'm sure, as you said, I'm sure people will have comments on it, but
Yep.
you have to really appreciate anyone who speaks in their truth. And Brent, I think, definitely has been true to his word, literally, in terms of speaking out against the injustice and having the empowerment to kind of bring other people along to kind of form a community where they're able to speak out and do actions to support Palestinians. And so I think really that's a huge call for us in independent media, which kind of echoes what Miko said to us back a couple of months ago of what he imagines mainstream media should be doing to uplift and empower Palestinians, that they're able to do similar work that Brent is trying to do as well.
Well, yeah. Let us know what you think in chat. Put that in the comments below if you're watching the clip. So, anyway, you want to switch to Zoom? See if that stops us freezing?
Sure.
Here, I'll make a new meeting. And people will see me for a second. Doubled up. Here, let's do that. This. Discord. And put you in there. Hello? There we go. Into the music. There you go. While you're doing that, I have to switch Discord. And then move us There we go. Look at that. I'm doing it. Cool.
The only thing
Yes.
that I'm seeing, oh, never mind. I saw like a 40-minute mark at the top of my screen. Now it's gone. So
Okay, cool. Well, here for our next story. Kenya warned us. Yeah, I'm bringing an Africa story, not my co-host this time. I know that's odd. But you know, sometimes
the black person must bring the Africa stories all the time,
right? Yeah. So this is from Phil Miller over at Declassified UK. And he's talking about how Kenya warned British Army about dangerous ammunition decades ago. With politicians in Nairobi holding an inquiry into the UK's military presence in Kenya, another family bereaved by British Army negligence speaks out. And I think you're seeing Africa as a whole push back on its Western counterparts in lots of ways. And I think this might be one of them. So did you get a chance to read any of this? If not, whatever.
No.
Cool.
But I think I
up.
did see something in relation to this earlier today. I think I sent you something that might relate to this.
Yeah, I think I've got that video. But I see what you sent me and I'll pull it up as well. So Kenya's military privately rebuked their British counterparts over lax handling of ammunition years before it emerged that hundreds of civilians had been harmed by unexploded ordnance from UK Army exercises. As early as 1985, a Kenyan officer complained that the British Army is lax in their handling of ammunition and explosives, according to the military report found by Declassified UK. The unnamed officer registered his concern after a mechanic was blown up by British ordnance in Nanyuki, the garrison town 90 miles north of Nairobi, where UK troops have a training camp. So, the victim, 27-year-old Yahir Muhammad, had a wife and 4 children. His eldest, Ali, is still traumatized from losing his dad at age 9. When I see the British Army in Nanyuki, I see my father dying, he told Declassified. Although Yahir's death was far from an isolated incident, it would take another 2 decades for the British military to publicly admit that more than 1,000 Kenyans had been harmed by its unexploded ordnance. These hazards are now being investigated by MPs as part of an inquiry into abuses by the British Army Training Unit Kenya, otherwise known as Batuk. Right? So, committee chairman Nelson Koech had promised the probe will be thorough, saying whether it dates back to independence from Britain in 1963, we have to get to the bottom of it. The evidence uncovered by Declassified UK suggests that much of the suffering could have been prevented decades ago had lessons been learnt from Yahir Muhammad's death in June 1985. So I have this video here that Declassified put together along with it that we're going to watch. But anything you wanted to say on this before we head into that?
Smells like Ukraine to me.
It smells like a lot of places, don't it?
Well, I said Ukraine.
Right? So, yeah, especially since they're about to get uranium ones. So, you know, whatever. It smells like a lot of things we talked about here with the testing of explosives, especially nuclear ones.
Right.
So, yeah, it's almost like war is fucking terrible all around. But anyway, we're gonna watch this. This is at the National Assembly, right? So between the UK and Kenya here.
These soldiers got away with this murder.
If it was another Kenyan out there in Britain, by now he would be languishing in their jails.
We must continue to reject the continuous domination of the white man on our land.
Explosives being left uncollected and unattended to, and blowing up young boys.
This government should not allow foreigners to take advantage of our people.
Order number 10, motion, ratification of the agreement between Kenya and the United Kingdom on defense cooperation.
Agnes Wanjiru is a 21-year-old lady who died brutally, and we believe was murdered by the British Army, and had a 5-year-old child at that time. UK Army did not want, had decided to brush this under the carpet. Let's reverse the roles and look at it differently. What if Agnes Wanjiru had killed a white soldier? What will have been the case? Agnes Wanjiru's body was found 2 months after her brutal murder in a septic tank. The only reason that this body was able to be found was because it had become a Facebook taunt by the UK military officers. And one of them confessed that when they left the bar that night, one of their colleagues committed the heinous murder of Agnes Wanjiru. And 10 years down the line, even though the memories are fading, I don't think it is too late to find justice for the family of Agnes Wanjiru.
Wanjiru is a Kenyan, she's a human being. And looking into how Britain looks into human rights, they should be the first people not to ignore such a thing. That family must be compensated.
These are the human rights we care about. This innocent young girl that died in the hands of these British soldiers in Laikipia, these are matters, the matters of human rights that we want to hear being talked about by Britain to the people of Kenya. We give to outsiders many times at the expense of locals. Because it's surprising that for all the years that the British soldiers have operated in Kenya, they have used our land for training without a specific payment being made to the people of Kenya. And if we extended to several large parcels of land across the country, then I would not be surprised to find many multinationals using our land without having to compensate the people of Kenya or the government of Kenya for the use of that particular land. And sometimes this is where we discriminate against ourselves. And perhaps even, Madam Speaker, how these soldiers got away with this murder was we have a way of giving preferential treatment to outsiders, to foreigners, at the expense of locals, Madam Speaker.
I think this agreement.
How many times we said that exact thing in almost all of these countries?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, you know, like.
They are an extension of colonial domination. The British continues to dominate us through some of these agreements by, having their officers train, army people train in our land and pretending to be giving us benefits. Madam Speaker, I heard the British High Commissioner say that since 2016, the British have spent about 5 billion shillings in supporting this program, and this money has gone into benefiting the economy of Kenya. Madam Speaker, this is quite peanuts. If you look at these agreements, they are heavily tinted in favor of the British. Even if you talk about the benefits, the subsistence benefits that I've had from my colleagues, about 500 people employed, some casual laborers, they don't compare, Madam Speaker. And if these agreements are an extension of colonialism, we have to reject them. We need to think beyond the peanuts that this agreement is giving us in terms of employment of a few people. And lastly, Madam Speaker, this issue of Wanjiru is more than just death. It is, for me, an affront on the dignity of a Kenyan. And the fact that the British soldiers can come here and kill one of us, and then they take that officer who allegedly did the killing has been taken back to their country, and then they tell us that the investigation is not sufficient. I think this is really an affront on the dignity of an African. And we must continue to reject the continuous domination of the white man on our land, on the back of saying that they're giving us some peanuts, some employment of 500 people, some little things. So, Madam Speaker, the philosophy behind these agreements is what this parliament needs to focus on, not the little benefits that the British people are giving us.
The matter of Wanjiru is very, very sad.
the matter of that young lady is traumatizing, to say the least. And until it is resolved, this country shall never be at peace with itself. Crime is crime, and murder is a crime. And therefore, we cannot exempt murder among those crimes or criminal acts that the host nation is required to try. When you commit murder, Madam Speaker, in a host nation, that host nation must have the jurisdiction to try you. To try you. Whether you have left the country's jurisdiction or not, you must be extradited to face trial. Because we may have similar cases in the future. Yeah, what shall we be telling Kenyans, especially my good friends from Laikipia, who are hosting this facility, that in future, if any other Kenyan would face the fate of Wanjiru, it would just go like that? No. No, we must send out a very strong message that anybody in this country who is aggrieved upon by these forces, the visiting nation forces, will have the chance to get justice.
Soldiers were joking for one of them to say that, oh, you know, my colleague so-and-so killed a Kenyan lady. That should not happen. In the county of Laikipia, in Isiolo, in Samburu, there are cases of unexploded ordnance devices, cases of rapes reported, cases of accidents by Batuk vehicles. What we are asking through this particular agreement is justice must be served in the courts of Kenya, not in the courts of the UK. The areas that Batuk is training in, these are pastoral areas. The pastoralists are normally herders, where they look after cattle, goats, and sheep and camels. Their areas are sparsely populated. Nobody should take advantage of these people. Finally, they could suffer disadvantages because many of them are illiterate. Many of them are people with small means. Nobody and this government should not allow foreigners to take advantage of our people.
I concur with the government of Laikipia County about commitment, the British Army, the Batuk, committing several atrocities to the people of Laikipia, not only that are harmful to the people, but also to the environment. We really remember vividly what happened in Rodaiga, the fire incidents, whereby even today, people are suffering from lung diseases. Some of them have been hospitalized, and we have also lost life.
And even issues, Honorable Speaker, that we have seen of landmines and explosives being left uncollected and unattended to, and blowing up young boys and herders as they had their livestock, Honorable Speaker, that the troops, wherever they train, they also remain very sensitive to the communities around them.
If it was an ordinary Kenyan out there in Britain, by now he would be languishing in their jails. But somebody just walks here and all of a sudden they commit that crime, and again, it's not fair. It is all about protecting Kenyans and not what we gain, the little money that we gain from the few shillings that they spend in some club. That not help us a lot.
Anything to say, Kippur?
I mean, how often do we need to repeat what we've said this numerous times, you know, in different ways, but it's still the same bullshit in terms of, well, in this case, the only difference is this is the UK, but white colonizers come in, use the global south as their playground, don't clean up their mess,
get US funding,
and the locals get affected.
Yep. Well, and it's not just us that is the cause of these like colonial crap either, you know. It takes a village to, you know, like keep that up. So like but what we are doing is is this, which Collin sent me, and I'm sure this isn't helping.
Kenya and the United States have signed a defense agreement. Nairobi will get US funding for leading a UN security mission to the Caribbean island of Haiti to, quote, restore order. Support will also be given for shared security interests in East Africa.
And I also thank the Secretary today for Kenya's willingness to consider leading a multinational security support mission in Haiti. The United States stands ready to support that mission by providing robust financial and logistical assistance. And we intend to work with the United States Congress to provide up to $100 million in support. And we urge others in the international community to follow Kenya's great example.
When all the processes, beginning with the approval by the UN Security Council, are put in place, Kenya is ready, Kenya is willing to lead that multinational peacekeeping force that will go to Haiti.
Past foreign interventions in Haiti have failed to secure peace. Haitians don't believe Kenya's deployment of 1,000 police officers will help.
So they asked military forces, Kenya and the UN to come and enter Haiti. Military force will not resolve the problems in Haiti is facing
Watchdogs
right now.
also warn against the deployment of Kenyan police officers who have a dismal human rights record. Nairobi believes the US deal will counter an al-Shabaab insurgency closer to home.
Greatest terror group in East Africa now is Al-Shabaab. They recruit, they radicalize young people for their own terror operations. And the US, under this framework, we are working with them on the whole space of counter-terrorism.
Kenya believes embracing imperialist forces is the answer.
Where have we heard that before?
In stark contrast to West African countries.
that base. What caught that?
That last half paragraph.
Yeah, Kenya believes embracing imperialist forces is the answer. This is that right there, right? Yeah, I know.
Police forces is the answer. In stark contrast to West African countries which are expelling them.
Exactly.
Like which you just saw. We just literally saw examples that those people are straight up killing these people. Like
I hate
yes, I know.
I hate saying this. I do, because it gives this impression like it's always the African leaders, the African presidents, prime ministers who are like corrupt as shit.
Yep.
Who will speak like they'll give this big talk in terms of the West is shit and like they're killing our people, whatever, but they're still willing to work with the West when it comes to getting money or to get something, you know, within the elites of their countries in exchange to oppress others.
But you notice they talked about other places in East Africa, Haiti, like they're gonna go take care of Haiti for us,
right?
Like what?
And it's like, and again, where's it? I mean, we have to go back to Brand's sermon. Where's the solidarity?
Where's the
solidarity?
Like, it's not there, Collin.
Right? You're saying, like, in one half, you were saying the British are killing you.
Yeah.
With unmanned weapons, right? Yep. And in the same breath, you're like, oh, we have to work with them and help the colonizers oppress our own in another part of the world because reasons. You know, you can fill in the blank in terms of reasons.
Well, keep in mind what we talked about with what other African countries are doing. You know, I mean, I'm not saying that they're setting examples, but they might be. You know, so choose your actions carefully is all I'm saying. You know, so you know, who knows? But this article goes into further detail of what these Western powers are willing to do to you. So, you know, keep that in mind when you're wanting to be buddies with them.
But you know what? Before you go on, like
Yeah.
I have to preface this with this, like, because we're hearing from the Kenyan leadership.
Sure.
We're not hearing from Kenyan people directly how they feel about this, how they feel about Kenyan police being deployed over in Haiti.
Yeah.
You know, I would argue
They're not happy about it either. Like,
well, if they know about it.
well, and Kenyan police
I
are
would argue
notorious for human rights
but
abuses.
I would argue for a regular schmegular Kenyan who's in the bush may not know all of this. So, you know, but so this is kind of why I'm kind of putting more disdain on the leadership that they should know better, because you are a lot more aware of what's happening in the world. And you definitely should be a lot more aware of what's happening in West Africa right now.
Right.
You would think that the last thing you want to do is align yourself with Western powers, especially since a lot of these countries are looking to get into BRICS.
Yes.
Or potentially get into BRICS at some point, and you still want to kind of play games with the West.
Which
Like,
that
it
should be
makes
a
no
rule for BRICS. Like, if you're playing with them, you know, like that might not be okay either. So,
Right. But I mean, that kind of puts Brazil and China into account, because they're doing the exact same shit.
in some ways,
And there are a
yeah.
lot- and not in some ways, they are.
Yes.
You know, but I can speak to these smaller countries because, you know, they have no stakes in terms of any economic power that they can necessarily garner for themselves at this point.
Right.
That they don't have any leverage necessarily to make demands of anybody. So, but it's just very disappointing. And again, just the usual talking of both sides of your mouth.
I know. It sucks. I know. It's like the direct dichotomy of both of those things is fucking bullshit.
Right.
I agree. Well, here's more bullshit. And this is just directly like, don't work for imperialist powers if you're in Africa. Just don't do it. Right? That's what I would say, even at a personal level. So this says, my father used to give the British Army scrap vehicles to go and do artillery practice with. Ali Mohammed said from his home in Nanyuki, where his family still runs a garage. When they finished the artillery firing, they used to give the cars back and tell him he could keep the scrap, Ali explained. One day, the army gave the garage 900 shillings, equivalent to 130 pounds today, which is like, what, almost 200 US?
Yeah.
Yeah. To use a vehicle. Yeah. To use a vehicle for target practice at Impala, a range owned by a family of European settlers. Oh, of course. So, a formerly secret UK military report on the incident says the car was returned to the garage together with ammunition boxes, contrary to British Army standing orders. Yafir was unaware of the danger. He had no idea, Ali said, because with scrap, you could only take metal, and he was just dismantling the car to check the engine was there and see what he could sell as aluminium. That's when the blast happened, Ali recalled. There was something in there that hadn't exploded on the firing range. Britain's High Commissioner, Leonard Allinson, said Yafir blew himself up by hammering a discarded mortar fuse, part of a scrap consignment. An army report said the explosion was heard up to 2 miles away. A Kenyan newspaper report from 1985 about the tragedy, right? UK army men at bomb scene. Police report said that investigations into the accident was due to be finalized soon. Meanwhile, the bomb blast victim was buried last Wednesday. So Yafir lost a hand and suffered several stomach injuries before passing away soon afterward in Nanyuki Hospital. I was with him that day, Ali said. It was Ramadan. We'd been fasting during the day. I came out of school, and that's when it happened. My father passed away. Ali still feels the loss. It's been terrible for us. He was the one who was taking care of everyone in the family. He was my best friend. He was young, handsome, and good-looking. My mom tells me I look just like my dad now, Ali added, with a slight laugh. His father's death followed another mishap that year in which plastic explosives went missing from a British Army exercise at Impala. This prompted a Kenyan military intelligence officer to tell UK officials, considering both incidents, it seems that the British Army is lax in their handling of ammunition and explosives. Norman Ling, a British diplomat, noted, our defense relations with Kenya have taken a knock in recent months, particularly over the Nanyuki incident, in which a Kenyan Asian was killed by an explosion caused by ammunition left behind after a British Army exercise. However, others in authority did not express concern. Files state that Kenya's chief of military intelligence was very relaxed about the death. After the explosion, Ali's uncle had to take over running the garage, and his grandfather, Suleiman Ali Muhammad, sought justice. He instructed a lawyer in Nairobi and appeared willing to accept 850,000, what's the currency there? Shillings. Equivalent of 88,000 pounds today, which is like almost 90,000, right? 100,000?
Closer to 100,000.
Yeah, in compensation for the family. A year after the death, Britain's defense attaché, Colonel Roger Southurst, wrote, we all admit we were responsible. Okay, well, let's stop in there. Someone needs to go to jail. If we're going to admit responsibility. But sadly, the affair still drags on, blaming the claimant's lawyer for inaction. So a commander from the UK Army's legal group visited Kenya in 1987 to review progress on the case. It was proposed they kickstart negotiations at 600,000 shillings, equivalent to 62,000 today in pounds. However, an official felt it is useful for a claimant to be left to prosecute his own case and hinted that they should let sleeping dogs lie. It is unclear from the file seen by Declassified whether any payment was authorized. Ali is unsure if his grandfather, who has now passed away, ever received compensation. Upon learning that Kenya's parliament is holding an inquiry into the British Army, Ali had mixed feelings. I was 50-50 because the years have passed too much and I can't claim anything, and I can't talk to anyone about it. Martin Day, the co-founder of London Law from Lay Day, which has worked on hundreds of similar cases, told Declassified, the level of unexploded ordnance in the central Kenyan Army range is very high indeed. We understand that some 10% of ordnance when fired do not explode, and yet no efforts seem to have been made to systematically clear the land following maneuvers historically. He added the ranges, which are not fenced off from the public, are a terrible hazard to unsuspecting local people, and the area should be cleaned up as a matter of great priority. In 2002, litigation by Lay Day forced the UK to award £4.5 million in compensation to 228 Kenyan civilians bereaved or injured by UXO and blasts stretching back to the late 1970s. Another round of payouts for more than 1,000 claimants followed in 2004. Despite these settlements, problems persisted, and in 2007, a Kenyan man working for the British Army was blown up by a plastic explosive. The victim, Robert Swari Saray, mistook the device for a candle. The UK Defence Minister admitted inadequate training practices contributed to his death. The case had strong similarities with Yafir Muhammad's death in 1985. A further casualty occurred in 2015 when a 13-year-old Samburu boy, Lushoka Leshwan, picked up a mortar fuse. It detonated, costing him both arms and an eye. An investigation found the British military knew the explosive used in the fuse was faulty before the accident took place. The type of ammunition has been since withdrawn from service. So here, a British soldier warns Kenyan school children not to touch mortars. Really? Okay. Well, hold on. We'll fix that. You said that earlier, right? That's because I'm not signed into the right one. Hold on. Let's see if I can sign in to the thing. Anything to say on this so far, Care Bear?
I mean,
there's a lot going on.
What more do I need to say other than what I said earlier?
Not much. Yeah, let's do this. And then make a new meeting. Before it kicks us out of Zoom.
I mean, yeah, is the British are bitches in terms of, yeah, we're going to kill you and we don't care, but we're going to use you as far as our colonization plans, and you will do it because we still have this belief that we still own you.
Yeah.
Like just due to historical colonization. So, yeah, it's just.
Here, let me send you a new link. I think I have to leave first. Hold on. Meeting. Technical difficulties are always the funnest stuff. Copy invite link. Send it to Care Bear. Have him join. Cool. That should fix things. There we go. Now we shouldn't be kicked out. Why did it sign me into Zoom? That's strange. Anyway, so a little bit more left to this article. But more recently, in 2021, another 13-year-old boy received burns after igniting a flare left behind by British troops. Schools in that area, which is used for firing live ammunition and white phosphorus chemicals, told the Sunday Nation that children as young as 7 have to be taught how to recognize unexploded bombs. Collin, what's the age of kids you teach?
4 and 5.
4 and 5. Imagine trying to teach 7-year-olds like what unexploded bombs look like. Like, anyway.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. Well, again, I've said this. Like,
yeah,
Princess Di. You know, this was her thing. You know, like landmines.
Yep.
You know, like that was her crusade when she was alive, and the idea that
what happened to her?
I think what happened to her. But since she's passed, it's like, but that's the thing. No one talks about this anymore.
No,
you know? So now
especially
it's like,
who did that one. No one talks about that.
Right. Right. But and now it's kind of, again, we're sending cluster bombs to Ukraine. It's like, what a turn coming from her death that we're now kind of going back to this idea of, yeah, it's okay to bomb people, and yeah, we can just let loose landmines or cluster bombs, and who gives a fuck about the locals who live there, especially if they're kids, like, because fuck them kids.
Yeah,
and
no one cares about them kids.
No, they don't. But...
God. So Britain also has a firing range in Canada where their license to operate is much stricter. I wonder why. A treaty governing that relationship explicitly requires the UK to pay any responsible cost associated with the removal or destruction of unexploded ordnance at the training area. So they got a better deal out of that. Just for people to make sure. Wonder what the difference is there in Canada and Kenya. Seems strange that they have two different deals going on. But
besides, more white people.
That must be it. It must be that. So, anyway, terrible. But yeah, why would you go run to another imperialist power while you're dealing with one imperialist power? It makes no sense.
It does if they feel like they're able to gain something, and it's going to be a crumb, but and even not for the people, it's mostly for them.
Right.
So it's again the idea of like corrupt leadership, and they'll do whatever they want to do in order to maintain their power and maintain their wealth, because it's not necessarily based in the country in which they live. It is based within these imperialist powers. So so I think that's why it's significant that a lot of these West African countries are willing to say now, fuck the West, we're kicking your asses out. Like now, basically, France has gotten the boot more formally now in Niger, now, which is great, and I just wish that other countries in the East, especially given that's where Kenya is able to follow suit in that as well. But again, there's just this very odd claim of entitlement, and then on the West part in Africa, and then on the African aspect of it is the idea of like, well, we are dependent on the West to function.
Yeah.
And more especially for these leaders, we're dependent on the West for our livelihood. So I will play nice with them in order to maintain my status.
Yep.
Yeah, it's just horrible. It's
awful in all accounts. Yeah. No solidarity. Yeah. Well, I'm sure people have words about this. Leave it in the comments. People who watch this clip, you got to make sure you engage. That's important. But anyway, speaking of engagement, you got some stuff.
Yeah, I
figure
this will probably be our headline story tonight, I guess. And I'm sure more people will come in now as I think other streams are ending probably at this point now. Not sure how. Actually, you could guys say this if you're watching the GOP debate. Let us know how it is. As we said, I had no idea that was happening tonight up until maybe a few hours ago. But anyway, so I've said this before and I'll say this again. Sometimes Twitter can leave gems. And I happened to come across this gem while trying to think of stories early in the week. And what's special about this is that this is a Substack article. This is written by Jim, as he's known on Twitter as Jim Kavanaugh, also known as the Polygamist. So I retitled this, but for this segment, but I titled it "The Ironclad Commitment," featuring Cornel West. Hold on, let's see if there we go. But his actual title for his article is "Cornel West on Jimmy Dore and Briahna on Kyle and Krystal, who's a default Democrat." And like I said early in the intro, I think he definitely brings up a couple of points that up till now, I haven't heard any independent media personality who has interviewed Cornel West ask. And I think moving forward needs to be asked in order to determine the viability of his upcoming campaign, especially given the idea that now Peter Dow is now campaign manager, I would argue, / communications director for this campaign. Go ahead.
No, it's just fucking making disgusted noises at Peter Dow.
Okay. But anyway, this is kind of a long one, so I'll get to it. But Jim writes, there were two energetic political conversations, well, now 2 weeks ago, that have been the subject of much discussion in the lefty blogosphere. The Jimmy Dore exchange with Cornel West and the Kyle Kalinske Krystal Ball conversation with Briahna Joy Gray. It's worth clarifying what I think is the essential issue in both of these exchanges. On the face of it, they were very different. In the Kyle Krystal Briahna conversations, the issues were, one, whether Cornel West should be running as a third-party candidate rather than as a Democrat challenging Joe Biden within the Democratic Party, with Kyle and Krystal arguing for the latter, and two, whether
Can you
or
stop
not
embarrassing yourself?
whether or not there is a substantial reason for leftists to vote for Joe Biden, who it was presumed would be the Democratic nominee next November.
Grow up, get serious.
With Collin and Krystal arguing that Biden had surprisingly earned their support, and Briahna staunchly refusing. In the Jimmy Dore Cornel West conversation, on the other hand, no one was arguing against Cornel running for a party, and no one was arguing for voting for Biden. Jimmy supports Cornel's third party run, and Cornel continually states his objection to milquetoast liberal Biden and never explicitly suggests that anyone should vote for him. Dore was somewhat clumsily pressing Cornel West on something else, and he did so in a way that lost focus and allowed the conversation to get sidetracked. And I actually do agree with this, and I actually have talked about that before. I felt, they spent too much time talking about things that should be assumed and actually get onto issues, which I think that kind of lacked.
Cornel brought that conversation up.
True.
If you go back and watch the interview, Cornel starts with that conversation of lesser evilism.
But I think Jimmy kind of leaned into that, and it just became
that's
like
what it
certain
was.
topics that they talked about was several minutes too long. They didn't need to go about whether Biden is more fascist than Trump. No one cares. Well, we care, but we both know like they both suck. Next.
Right. And the issue is that
actual shit.
His conversation was terrible in that regard.
Right.
To the point where Jimmy was shocked and had to keep questioning. Anyway.
Right. There's a specific, precise question that Jimmy could have asked, which would gotten the answer about Cornel's campaign that I think he was looking for. I should say, first of all, that I know Cornel West. We were colleagues at Princeton together back in the day and ran in the same social and intellectual circles. He's a great guy. I respect him enormously, and he certainly has the best overall political position of anyone now running for president.
Hey, you haven't looked at Afro Man's thing. I'm just saying, he's not the only black guy running. Afro Man exists. I know he's a joke, but he's there.
Nonetheless, there are important issues regarding the relation of Cornel and the Green Party's campaign to the Democratic Party and Biden, or whoever is the Democratic nominee, that Jimmy was trying to get at, and that a lot of people on the left, myself included, want to understand precisely. Jimmy Dore missed the opportunity to pose a key question that would have clarified that. It's a question that we and Cornel should know the answer to. Oh, wait.
He sent him an email. Yeah.
So I asked him, on Monday, September 11th, I sent Cornel an email asking this question. Will you actively campaign for every vote in every state, no matter who the Democratic and Republican nominees are, and no matter what effect that has on either of them? Or come the crunch in November, when we are told the outcome in 4 states will decide the election, because that's what happens.
Yep.
Is there some possibility that you will adopt what's been the previous Green Party strategy of saying that voters in swing states should vote for the Democrat in order to stop Trump or whoever is the Republican nominee?
Pause. Something that Cornel has also pushed by himself.
Right.
Okay. Yeah.
So, of course, I'm prepared to accept that Cornel is at the moment too busy to answer an email from someone he hasn't seen in years.
So no response is what we're hearing.
Then, in the development last week, 2 weeks ago, that surprised and caused more brouhaha among lefties, Cornel appointed Peter Dow as his new campaign manager. Even more surprising to some, that was done on the advice, she says, of Jill Stein, who, quote unquote, didn't know of Peter Dow in his days as DSC defender, end quote. I won't comment specifically on this other than that to say that either Dow's radical break with his horrible Clinton-like political past is sincere or it is not. We will see. I have an open mind about that. But whether Dow is reformed or not, a lot of leftists are turned off by this decision. Compton J of Revolutionary Blackout Network, for example, where he says, this is no different than Cornel being picking Briahna in the beginning. This is like putting a reformed KKK member in charge of a movement to liberate Black people. It's great that you are reformed, but in no way should you be in a supervisory advisory position. I hope Cornel's decision was based on more awareness of these considerations than Jill's recommendation.
Nope.
We'll see. Relevant to my discussion here, Dow's appointment gave me another address for my question, especially when I saw this tweet. So this was a tweet that he sent on the 12th. Our Ironclad Commitment. Cornel West will be on the ballot next November. There'll be no dropping out and endorsing a Democrat. We're here to oppose the system, not to reinforce it. So I immediately replied to Dow. I'm a colleague of Cornel West from Princeton, though I haven't seen him in years. I mailed him this question, though I expect he's too busy to respond. It's not a question of whether he will drop out, but whether he will adopt a safe state, swing state strategy, either explicitly, or implicitly. Here's the question. Will you actively campaign for every vote in every state, no matter who the Democratic and Republican nominees are, and no matter what effect that has on either of them? Or come the crunch in November when we are told the outcome in 4 states will decide the election, is there some possibility that you will adopt what has been the previous Green Party strategy of saying or implying that voters in swing states should vote for the Democrat in order to stop Trump, whoever is the Republican nominee? Can you answer that directly and definitely on his behalf? I am planning on publishing an article or video Wednesday evening that includes a discussion of Cornel's campaign, and I want to understand and communicate the campaign's position accurately.
And that was September 12th.
That was September 12th.
Yeah.
I think this is a crucial question, the answer to which will tell Jimmy and the rest of us exactly what we want to know without veering off into arguments about fascism and white supremacy. In fact, I know it's a crucial question for many leftists who support Cornel is seeking, because a slew of them responded to my tweet thusly. So this is at DieMaximumMe. My vote for the doctor hangs on the answer to this question. My vote is for a thumb in the eyes of both parties. I want to vote, and for it to count, and for it to be for neither of them. At Mystic Mind 17 says, that is the question. I'm pretty sure he won't answer it if anyone has the courage to ask. Here's at Redemption UBI. If this happens, I'll 100% vote Trump and never take the Green Party serious again.
Mm-hmm.
Last one from Prometheus. So your question is, are you running a real campaign or just raising awareness?
Yep.
I have not had a response to that question from either Cornel or Peter. I can believe Cornel is too busy. I do not believe Dow has not seen the chain of responses to his dramatic Ironclad Commitment.
I don't know. He's got a lot of us blocked. I'm just saying.
It's a question that needs a response. Leftists who are here to oppose the system, not to reinforce it, want to know whether Cornel is in this to do everything he can to build an independent left party and movement, no matter what the cost to either duopoly party, or whether he's in it to raise issues, but with the overriding goal to prevent the Republicans, especially Trump, from winning. In other words, to remain a pressure point on the Democratic Party. I truly do not know what Cornel's answer is. I know that the campaign has to answer it or accept the answer that many presume his silence gives. They must know that every moment not answering that question will cost them supporters. At any rate, the answer will be questioned by November 2024, when, 3 days before the election on MSNBC, Chris Hayes asked Cornel, polls show a dead heat between Biden and Trump in Pennsylvania, Arizona, and Wisconsin. Are you still urging every voter in those states to vote for you? And Cornel answers either simply yes, or gives some complicated version of, I'll like everyone's vote, but I also understand precious people's fear of neo-fascism and the loss of democracy under Trump. I can't tell people how they should vote. I respect everyone's decision.
He left out.
That allows him to.
He left out Curtis. He'd somehow pull that back to Curtis Mayfield. You know he would.
Okay. This also sounds like what Jordan Charlton would say. Honestly. Like, and has said.
Or any of these people. Yeah.
Right.
I mean.
The hoes be knowing.
Something that allows him to say he didn't drop out or endorse a Democrat, but sends a message of system reinforcement that everyone understands. Not to do that is the ironclad commitment my question asks for, and Cornel West and Peter Dow know they have not given. Please note that this question gets to the core of what both the Jimmy Cornel and Kyle Krystal Briahna conversations are about. The answer to this question tells us how different Cornel West actually is from the people who are criticizing him for being a third-party candidate, like Kyle. Kyle led the attack on Cornel for running third-party rather than Democrat, but he also says that he's going to vote for Cornel West in New York because it's a safe state. For Klinsky, then, running in the third party is actually good if it only has a political effect in safe states. So, if Cornel does not make the ironclad commitment to endanger the Democrats in swing states, he and Kyle are on the same page. They're on the same political page about the relation of leftist politics with the Democratic Party and the duopoly, which is a lot. This is something that leftists to whom Cornel is making a pitch want to and should know. You're in agreement.
Well, just the fact of, I mean, you've said this before too, is who is Cornel trying to get votes from?
Right.
Is he going for shit libs, or is he going for fucking the people who actually matter? You know, I think that's what Jimmy was trying to get to the bottom of too, is like, what are you going to give me? You know, like, what's your plan? Do you have a plan?
Right.
How are you actually going to fix things? Or is this just a book tour?
Right.
You know, which a lot of us already know the answer to this, because electoralism bad anyway. So,
right.
You know, but yeah. I mean,
so anyway, we'll continue. So I wish Jimmy had asked Cornel that question, the answer to which would clarify what he was trying to get at in challenging Cornel. Dore may feel that the logic of the distinction Cornel was making between Biden and Trump implies that Cornel will, indeed must, adopt that safe state, swing state strategy.
I think that's in his thinking. It's Jimmy was more after what does he think, not what is he gonna like, what the plan is, minute like details of that. You know, it's like, are you still under the impression that there is lesser evils here? Like, which obviously he does. You know, so in and of itself, that speaks to Cornel, not even the Cornel campaign.
Right.
So I feel you, but also, you know,
well, again, this is,
I know,
yeah. An op-ed. So,
yeah.
I mean, you don't have to agree with, but I mean, so far, you know, like,
he's pretty close.
Of what we've said, what I've said, or tried to say in a way that if I was more articulate, that I would be able to say something like this. But he also brings up something that I don't think anyone has necessarily brought up. It's the idea of like, is he ironically doing the swing state strategy that Kyle has been preaching about?
Yeah.
So, which he argues, if he is, he's more aligned to Kyle. Therefore, that kind of goes into what you were saying. He's probably running to get PMCs on board.
I think that's
for his
where
campaign.
he's at too. I think that's where Cornel's thinking is at. He's been in that bubble for so fucking long that it's hard to see things differently. Like he doesn't, his COVID stuff is not great, you know, as far as what he thinks about it, you know.
Right.
Same thing with Russia.
We talked about with the child tax credit last week, what he said about to RBN regarding that he gave Brian credit for doing something which he should not have given him credit for.
He needs to fucking
get serious.
He needs to grow up, get serious. Like, people are way past this thinking already. You know, you got to catch up. So,
anyway, let's go on. I too feel that may be Cornel's ultimate position. So I guess this is safe state, plain state strategy. But I'm not sure, and I'd like Cornel to answer it. It's certainly my point of view that no independent left-third party in the United States will get anywhere until and unless it makes Democrats lose elections. The purpose of a third party is precisely to defeat the Democrats as well as the Republicans.
Right.
The Green Party has been problematic for leftists, and there are all kinds of reasons why third parties may be doomed within the US electoral system anyway. But as a general principle, a third party that is not willing to, does not understand it must make Democrats lose elections is a third party that will never go anywhere. It's just a pressure point on the Democratic Party. This goes to the central point of how one understands the relationship between the left and the Democratic Party. We have this bizarre notion in the United States that there's some intrinsic relation between the left and the Democratic Party, that leftists are naturally closer to the Democrats. It goes back to the aura surrounding FDR, but has been repeated among cohorts that gravitated to the Democrats because of Nixon and Watergate or Bush and Iraq, forgetting things like the Party of the Klan, the LBJ and Vietnam.
Also, FDR wasn't great either. Like, it was okay in some very niche aspects, you know. So,
most leftists today consciously understand that in the post-Clinton Democratic Party, the progressive, social, or peaceful international party they may have been seeking is gone, baby gone, and never coming back. Still, there lingers in many an unconscious, implicit belief that there's something in the Democratic Party as an institution or in its nominee personally, some essential quality, no matter how well hidden, that is or wants to be a force for significant progressive change, and that the Republican Party is a primary obstacle to any such change. Therefore, in the political contest between the Democrats and Republicans, the left must ultimately support the Democrats as the only possible check, as the only politically possible check against the essentially more reactionary Republicans. This is the notion that leftists are default Democrats.
Any blue will do, if you will.
This is a pernicious, paralyzing assumption that we must extirpate from our minds.
Extirpate? Exactly. Yeah, sure.
Extirpate. Yeah. Being a leftist has nothing to do with being a Democrat. The political left and right, in my understanding of it, do not correlate with Democrat and Republican. They correlate with class positions.
Which goes back to Jimmy's original argument.
Right.
That everyone was upset with. You reword it, everyone's fine with it, though. Like, okay. Literally, you just move the sentences around.
As some of us have known for a long time, and it's now clear to most leftists, the Democratic Party is not the party of or for the working class. If it ever was, it has now, as Chuck Schumer has stated, explicitly renounced any such role. It now strains, and only intermittently, to attract working class support, precisely because its programs and politicians do not advance working class interests against those of corporate and financial capital, and in some way that is more crucially different from the Republican Party. Despite any conjuring of the ghost of FDR, the Party is, as increasing numbers of Americans recognize, an enemy of the working class. Despite any prior demonizing of Bush, the Democratic Party fully internalizes his warmongering imperialist spirit and is an enemy of world peace. It is therefore not a party of the left. And the idea that there's any natural connection between being a leftist and supporting Democrats, that leftists are default Democrats, is ridiculous and unmedical in our minds. We absolutely must do away with that. Extrapolating that persistent and pernicious assumption from people's minds is, in fact, one of the most important missions of any independent left third-party movement. The intrinsic relation between the Democratic Party and the left is that they are enemies. The Democrats know this, and leftists should. The Democratic Party is not an essential more progressive institution than the Republicans. Its job is to be, and it is, as Glenn Ford of Black Agenda Report said, the most effective obstacle to any serious progressive reform. It does that by co-opting the movements for such reform and killing them, as it did with Medicare for All, the prime example, or the UAW strike right now. Right. Which, as an aside, it's ridiculous that people are saying, oh, Biden is based because he went. Bitch went for what? 15 minutes. He walked the picket line for what, 10? And spoke for like 2 minutes? Yeah. And you call that solidarity. And you call that, well, that's great, but, and like, there's a reason why, again, aside, there's a reason why this is called historic. Because back in the day, I'm sure people understood that the idea of having a political figure at your strike will kill the movement. And we talked about this with Smalls 2 years ago. Well, 2 years ago now.
We talk about it with Randy Weingarten. We talk about it with that. Pick a union. Like they all have this problem in one way or another, like politicizing themselves. And it's similar to how Cornel is politicizing himself. You know, like this is what Jimmy was trying to get to. Is like, are you actually going to stay to class politics, or are you going to fall into democratic identity stuff? Are you going to because that's where he's headed with the way he's been talking.
And I will prove that sort of later. But anyway, talking specifically about Biden or Trump, neither candidate has any claim by any leftist metric to be substantially better than the other. Joe Biden is a proudly reactionary politician who, over his 50-year political career, has done more damage to the American people, to the multiracial working class, particularly to Black Americans, and to millions of people around the world than Donald Trump has done or is likely to do. I repeat, by any leftist metric, by far. I dare anyone to argue otherwise, and people will. But we won't hear because we agree. There's a fundamental difference between the left that understands itself as default Democrats and the left that's indifferent to the pretension that Democrats are less of an enemy than Republicans. It was nicely demonstrated when Kyle said to Bree, let's just say it's election night 2024. It is all of our worst nightmare, Biden versus Trump. It's going to be Biden or Trump winning. Are you sitting here like, of course, I would prefer Biden win over Trump. And she said, honestly, I don't care. They are living in two different political paradigms. I'm with Bree. I don't know where Cornel is. As I understand it, to be a leftist means precisely not to be in some complicated sympathetic relationship with, but to reject being a Democrat. Of course, these discussions really need to be reconsidered in light of the fact that Joe Biden is not going to be the Democratic nominee in November 2024. His cognitive decline is too fast and too obvious. So what will Kyle and Krystal do with it?
They'll keep him going, bro. Don't worry about it.
I mean,
They have the
that's wishful
technology.
thinking. That's wishful thinking.
Like
Fine, like
wheelchair
where it says
presidents
that.
have been in wheelchairs before, so you know, like they'll make an excuse.
So what will Kyle and Krystal do with a Democrat that does not have what they consider Biden's surprising presidential accomplishments, which they say are what made him worthy of their support? Will Cornel find a less different milquetoast liberal more worthy to protect in swing states? As the party comes back into focus as the principal actor, everyone will demonstrate whether their true allegiance is to it or something else.
Well, I remember when Kyle used to talk about Obama. You know, like to me, the things are like, is Biden better than him? So you're willing to throw your support at that guy because you didn't like Obama. Like, you called out what he did, rightfully so. Anyway, we know what happened there.
Actually, Kyle has already answered, endorsing Gavin Newsom, the party's likely replacement, who's net slightly
Can you
to
stop
the left of
embarrassing
Joe,
yourself?
slightly to the left of Joe Biden. Kalinske instantly replaced praise for Biden's surprising NLRB policy with applause for Newsom's wonderful labor achievements, sectorial bargaining, which is massive for fast food workers. Via text, email, or telepathically, he's getting a memo from the DNC saying, focus on labor issues. We need the unions. Yeah, you need the unions because they actually
They're the only thing that give lefties cred at all. They have to like, yes. Yep.
We'll have to await Cornel West's net appraisal. Don't forget, it's only on domestic policy so-called progressives can make any pretense of significant distinction between the Democrats and Republicans. No one can any longer make the case that the Democratic Party is any less imperialistic and warmongering than the Republican Party. Kyle going on about how Joe Biden was less likely to get us into World War III was another classic different universe of thought moment. In the universe Bree and I live in, Biden's already got us into World War III. So the core issue in both of these discussions, which you see explicitly in Kalinske and Krystal, and maybe implicitly in Cornel, is whether a leftist is a default Democrat. One votes for the Democrats by default because something about that party is just essentially more leftist or less fascist than the Republicans. Again, from my left position, the Democratic Party has to be understood as the most effective obstacle to any significant social democratic or anti-imperialist policy. They take popular positions, Medicare for all, and forever wars that will win elections, pretend they'll be doing something about them, and actually kill them. Not because Republicans prevent them, but because the Democratic Party itself opposes them. That's what they did with Medicare for all. The Republican Party did not and could not stop a progressive program like Medicare for all, which is enormously popular among Republicans and Democrats, working class. Let's make that clarification. If we had a Democratic president and a Democratic Party and its allied media who were committed to getting it, they would have repeatedly and consistently argued for, explained, promote, and use every political tool to achieve it, half as much as they did to promote Russiagate and impeach Trump twice and send hundreds of millions to Ukraine. The Republicans could not stop it. And the Democrats know that. But we don't. And we don't have a weak version of it. We have the opposite. It is only because the Democrats don't do that and won't do that and are strongly opposed to it, not because the Republicans prevent them from doing it, that we do not now have Medicare for all. If we're ever going to have Medicare for all or any significant social democratic program like it, we have to reject and defeat the party that deliberately and effectively kills such initiatives. Briahna's exchange with Kyle and Krystal about Biden not canceling student loan debt was another case in point. So I enjoyed watching both of these charged exchanges. Bree was brilliant with Kyle and Krystal. Jimmy stumbled and missed a chance to get a precise, on-point answer. but we can see that the core issue in both conversations was the relationship between the left and the Democratic Party, and how that defines the purpose of a third-party campaign. We know what Kyle and Krystal's position is, and I think Cornel should state clearly whether he's ironclad committed to campaigning for every vote in every state, or only in a way that will not allow his campaign to be the reason Biden, the Democratic Party, is defeated by Trump, the Republican Party. That's what I think Jimmy Dore was getting at. That's what would tell us something about how different Cornel is from Bernie or Kyle. That I think is something a lot of leftist inquiring minds want to know.
Sure.
So any thoughts? I know.
Not really. I mean, other than what people already know, you know, I think all those options are kind of bad. Like, I don't think Bree gets it either, you know?
No, but I would say, for what I did watch from her interview with Collin and Krystal, I agree with a lot with what she said, but I don't particularly trust her either, because, you know, she's kind of saying it in a way because she's kind of forced to be that opposition to Collin and Krystal. And as I said, she knows their position. She talked with Krystal about similar shit last year, and Krystal gave similar responses last year. So I don't understand the point of her doing this interview to rehash a lot of the same talking points. The only difference was Kyle was kind of yapping every once in a while and try to be all tough and shit with her.
And also, I don't think Jimmy necessarily stumbled. I think a lot of people looked for a stumble that he was thrown into. You know, like, I think it was more Cornel that couldn't answer direct questions. You know, like.
Would you argue, though, just to play devil's advocate, maybe Jimmy could have phrased things better or not gone into that rabbit hole with Cornel? Like, being able to kind of drag.
I think there was other ways to get to that rabbit hole, but I think it ended up with he put identity politics on the table because he couldn't answer it any other way. You know?
But I would also argue with Jimmy, like, there was no need to go down that rabbit hole at all.
That's the issue, and what a lot of people don't know is that Cornel started the rabbit hole, and Jimmy was like, "All right, let's go down it."
Into that,
right?
Yeah, and I would rather, and that's what I was saying earlier. I'd rather him. My critique of Jimmy in that interview is that I'd rather him not gone down that rabbit hole because they spent like too long talking about issues that at the end of the day really don't matter.
Yeah.
Like, I don't give a fuck who's more fascist, Biden or Trump. Can we agree that both of them are bad? If anything, Biden may be worse.
Cornel could have done that. Yes. He didn't.
Yeah, but I think, because we know Cornel, again, I say this out of respect for Dr. West, but, you know, Dr. West has to bring an academic stance to everything that he says. He tried to justify, I think in a lot of ways, he's also trying to justify why he was supportive of Biden in the past, and as recently as 2020, and trying to move away from that now. But I don't think he's doing a good job, or at least he's not convincing me that he's fully invested in really going in on Biden when he needs to and should do. But so with all of that, and again, for the most part, I mostly agree with what Jim was saying here. I do think he brought up a good point of the question should be, like, which kind of goes along. Well, let me say this first. The question should be, is Cornel running to get every vote in every state? To me, that's the priority. And then along with that is, when it's crunch time, and you're going to have people in swing states, because I know certain people are playing this narrative of, like, if you're in a safe state, you can afford to vote Cornel. But if you're in a swing state, you probably should vote for whoever the Democrat nominee is. You know, we've heard Kyle say that. We heard other people say that. You know, so this is kind of significant because when Peter was with Sabi a couple of weeks ago, you know, Sabi kind of asked him what their demands are. You would think, in my mind, actually, I'll play it and then we can talk about it. So go ahead.
So one of the key things that we like to talk about a lot on this show are demands. Like when you have a movement, you have to have a set of demands. Bernie Sanders, I think if you look back at his political campaigns, everybody knows Medicare for all, right?
Yep.
What would you say is going to be the key topic or the key item here in reference to this campaign and this movement, so to speak? What would you say if you had to say the top 2 or 3 issues that you were going to focus on for this campaign? What would those be? And is there a set of demands?
Okay, the demands and the more nuances of the message I want to leave to Dr. West. I'm an operations person. It's not, I have my personal beliefs and I've shared some with you, but I'm not the policy person. However, let me identify 2 issues right away. The issue of the oppression through this capitalist system of tens upon tens of millions of people, both racial oppression as well, and deep, deep inequality. The people who are forgotten. These are the people Dr. West has always spoken to and about. In other words, centering the people that no duopoly campaign will ever center and focus on. And that's broad, but it is representing and speaking, uplifting the people who are forgotten by the system. As I said, I was doing an interview with a mainstream reporter, and I said, the vast majority of people are suffering. He said, what do you mean most people are suffering? I said, do you have any idea what it's like for the working class to survive in this country, to get medical care, to afford food? So the forgotten people. Another major one, critically important, the climate issue. Now, Dr. West on climate is about 500 steps ahead from what any Democrat or Republican would ever say. The Democrats are equally, if not worse, because under Joe Biden, we have had more oil drilling than under Trump. And this is one of the existential crises of our time, and we're running for the nomination of the Green Party. So I will tell you right now, the climate issue is going to be absolutely central to this campaign because it is one of the great threats of our time. But also the oppression of the people through this capitalist system, this oligarchy in which a few people are running away with everything, and the duopoly serves those people and builds the laws and the structure around them. And the people, the working class is completely forgotten.
So I know I spoke about this clip before, at least online.
Sure.
Like,
well, I can go if you want me to.
Go ahead. Go. I've spoken enough.
It feels like when like you're told when someone spits out reparations to you, right? Where it's like it seems pandering.
Yes.
It's like, oh, I gotta get a Green Party, but like this is just the shallow thinking that Democratic fucking campaign people like. It's green. We got to care about the environment. Is that people's number one issue right now? He also talked about the oppressed and the economics was like what also Cornel would speak to, but no mention of how. How is he going to speak to that?
I felt, and watching this again, this is maybe the 4th time I've seen this part.
Sure.
I felt he was kind of pandering to Savvy because talking about like RBN, that's their issues, like helping the oppressed. So he probably felt, look, I need to say those buzzwords to kind of make good with Savvy, about, trying to, make myself look good. But as you said, and this is what I was saying weeks ago.
Yeah.
While climate is important, that's not the important thing that voters are going to be voting on. They're going to be voting on the economy. Always.
Didn't we talk about
the number one issue?
This is what Jimmy gets frustrated when you don't know the COVID issue. How are you going to talk about Medicare for all when a majority of Americans are heavily distrusting of the medical system right now? After they were lied to for the last 4 or 5 years. That's an important thing to get right to move forward.
But you would think, and this is the point that I want to kind of connect to the article, I would think your number one priority is ensuring that people are able to vote for Cornel in every state.
Sure.
Like, that was an issue with the People's Party. That was why people wanted him to go to the Green Party in the first place.
Right.
It's because the lack of ballot access. Greens, there's a lot more, but not everyone is guaranteed to vote for Cornel in every state. So wouldn't that be your priority to ensure that as many states as possible are able to have Cornel on the ballot? And what are you going to be doing towards that? But then the bigger question is, as Jim was saying in the article, come let's say October 2024, in these swing states, what is Cornel going to say?
Well, in fact, just having doubt in general, if you are trying to get the voters who are disillusioned with the Democratic Party because of what happened with Bernie, because of that Clinton campaign, because of we wanted to leave the Dem exit literally happened at that Clinton DNC convention. Jimmy was there to cover it. Cornel, I think, was one of the few people who even understood what was happening there. And now he's hiring the guy who literally harassed people for believing in Bernie. Anyway,
look, well, whatever.
Just politically naive is what I would call him right now.
Yeah. Either way, we're stuck with him. Well, we stuck with
I'm
him.
not.
Because, right.
We don't got to vote. None of you had to vote.
Right.
So,
but I do think the question that Jim posed in terms of what are you going to tell people who live in a swing state? What are you going to say to them? And that's even a guarantee if they're able to vote for him at all, because that should be the priority over anything else. But then formulate policy that you're able to attract non-voters or people who are so disenchanted with the duopoly that they feel they're willing to take the risk.
Right.
And vote green, and not to be afraid of or being punked into voting blue because the media will tell them that you throw away your vote if you vote green. It's basically, and like he said, it's basically you're voting green because you're essentially throwing up a fuck you to the duopoly. You don't want to be a thorn on the Democratic side. You want to be a damn sword. You want to stab the motherfuckers.
Mm-hmm.
So really so this has kind of been my concern, but I think in this article, it brought up more of the issues that maybe I may not subconsciously been thinking about, but was not able to articulate. It's the idea of how are you going to convince people to make that risk voting for you, assuming that they're able to vote for you at all? What's your pitch? And right now, I haven't heard anything at this point besides more of the classical shit that we see every politician do.
Yeah.
So
you're going to have to
I'm going to continue
outside of the box thinking if you're going to get anything here. So, and I don't see that right now. And Collin doesn't see that right now.
Right now, we're seeing Cornel kind of doing, he went to the UAV strike first.
But so did Biden, so did that's just a photo op.
Right. So
what are you doing to actually support them? How are you supporting the strikers? Are you saying give to the campaign? Anything. Well, anyway, Indy in the chat, how does Cornel sound different from the squad? He really doesn't. They say the same shit.
If anything, he's using the same tactics.
Yeah. So he was there to write the tactics to begin with.
Right.
But
I'm the asshole and I've been continued to be called an asshole online, and people who are saying, "Oh, you don't organize," I do, and I can speak to that.
Just innocent man.
Like, you know, but I continue to get shitted on online because I have criticisms for their idol, the newest
You're
idol.
tearing me apart, Lisa.
But yeah. Anyway,
well,
yeah,
no, I know. Normally we don't.
Normally we don't do stories like this, but I think the Cornel thing has kind of died down somewhat. But I think this was important to kind of, and actually in a way, I wanted to do this to kind of be a little ahead of the game, because I'm sure people will kind of get the point too late.
Yeah.
And we will be like, well, we talked about this a year ago.
Yeah.
And, you know, and we were kind of on the ball right from then. So, you know, I'm pretty sure that's the epiphany for most folks will happen soon enough. But I just feel like there's too much support of Cornel and not enough critique to really push him to actually be better and to really stand out against the duopoly. Because right now it just feels like
people are just going
floating.
through the motions.
You're just floating right now. Yeah, you're just floating right now. Like, what do you plan to do? Like, your biggest thing right now is ensuring that you're getting on the ballot in every state, ideally. And even with that, how are you going to convince people who never voted green in their damn life to make the risk to vote green? That's what you should be working on. Not talking about climate change and a vague definition of oppression, which, sorry, Sabby, if I was you, I would have pushed that. What does that mean?
Right.
Like,
what does that justice look like for you? How are you going to get it?
Right.
Like, it's two questions away at most before you really depressed at the answers he gives, because he might not have them. So anyway, I one of the questions I would have liked to have seen asked was, who does Cornel think bombed the Nord Stream pipeline? What do you think? What do you think his answer is going to be on that one? Because I haven't heard him answer it. So this guy has, you know him, you love him, Seymour Hersh, in the building tonight. So this is a year since his first one that he wrote on this that everyone got all up in arms about. If you don't know Seymour Hersh, he's been a pretty impressive writer over the years. Talked about Abu Ghraib, talked about stuff in Vietnam, done quite a bit. So the Biden administration has acknowledged neither its responsibility for the pipeline bombing nor the premise of the sabotage. So a year of lying about Nord Stream, correct? So recently, none other than Jimmy Dore went on to the UN of all fucking places. A pothead comedian in his basement.
And notice, and I said this online, no one talked about that.
No
one talked about that.
Yeah.
Any drama-related shit is what's news. That's what gets it. But
this gives him cred, and they don't want to talk about that.
Honestly, if this was an alternate universe, this should have been a trending topic, honestly.
Yeah.
But no, they're not going to talk about that because Jimmy actually used his position to actually do
something. Or someone.
I mean, you can argue was this
someone we may know may had an effect on that. So good for you if that was you. Maybe an INN member, maybe, possibly. But you know, we'll see. But anyway, I wanted to give Jimmy a chance to speak here, and let's hear what he has to say on it.
Greetings, Mr. President, distinguished members of the Council. I'm here to speak today about the attack on the Nord Stream pipeline that took place 1 year ago on September 26, 2022. 4 explosions ruptured the Nord Stream 1 and 2 pipelines that carried natural gas from Russia to Europe. It was the biggest act of industrial sabotage in human history, severing the main artery for energy from Russia to Germany, cheap energy that was critical to maintaining Germany's industrial base. We have heard every cockamamie and ridiculous theory on how this happened. Now, you don't need to be a genius investigative reporter to figure out who was the culprit of the Nord Stream attack. Incredibly,
Look at Jimmy trying to sneak cock into the UN. Into the UN. I mean, he put cockamamie, but I know how this man thinks. Don't worry about it.
most Western news outlets ignore the fact that the President of the United States, Joe Biden himself, announced on February 9th, 2022, that he would in fact attack the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, saying, and I quote, "If Russia invades Ukraine, tanks crossing the border again, there will no longer be a Nord Stream 2 pipeline. We will bring an end to it. I promise you, we will be able to do it." Even with that pre-admission of guilt from the President of the United States, most of the Western press remained baffled as to who could have pulled off the greatest act of eco-terrorism in history. But luckily, we don't have to rely on my interpretation of President Biden's clear threat to attack the pipelines. We actually have Seymour Hersh, a genius investigative reporter with impeccable reputation and credentials, who reported that in June of 2022, United States Navy divers operating under the cover of a widely publicized summer NATO exercise known as Baltops 22 planted the remotely triggered explosives that 3 months later destroyed 3 of the 4 Nord Stream pipelines, according to a source with direct knowledge of the operational planning. And like all criminals, the perpetrators could not contain their elation over committing the crime. Shortly after the attack, many high-ranking U.S. officials could not help but brag about their achievements and expressed multiple times how they were proud of being able to put an end to the pipelines. Undersecretary of State Victoria Nuland said, "I am, and I think the administration is, very gratified to know that Nord Stream 2 is now, as you like to say, a hunk of metal at the bottom of the sea."
There was a hunk of burning love, but
Secretary of State Antony Blinken called it a tremendous opportunity
tremendous
to once and for all remove the dependence on Russian energy. You have to be a paid liar to not acknowledge the hand of the United States in carrying out these attacks. Not only did President Biden declare he would do this, but high-ranking U.S. officials have said similar things for years. We can look to 2014 when former Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice stated that over the long run, you simply want to change the structure of energy dependence. You want to depend more on North American energy platforms, which is what this is really all about. An economic war between the West and Russia in order to fill the pockets of rapacious capitalists who actually pull the strings of the US government and dictate foreign policy. So let's pull back and take a look at the context in which this pipeline bombing occurred, shall we? It's all happening under the guise of defending Ukraine from an unprovoked Russian invasion. But of course, that's only true if you start the story of the Ukraine war somewhere near the end of the story instead of the beginning, which would indict Ukraine, the US, and NATO. The US and NATO are to blame, which is why the Western media always leaves the origin of this conflict out of their coverage and leaves most people in the dark with a false version of the cause of the conflict. Most Americans believe that Vladimir Putin woke up one
Don
day
Clark
and decided
shared a
for
file.
no particular reason to invade Ukraine and start a war completely out of the blue. This is what supporters of the Ukraine in this war actually believe, because that's the only narrative they hear from their news media, which is funded by the people who profit off this war, the military-industrial complex, the fossil fuel companies in the West, and of course, Wall Street. To make a crude analogy of the Western media's coverage of the Russian invasion is the following. Let's say Vladimir Putin was standing on a bus stop and there was an old lady standing in the street and a bus was heading straight for her. So Vladimir Putin pushes the old lady out of the way of the oncoming bus and down onto the concrete sidewalk. The Western corporate media would start that story near the end saying, Russian president pushes old lady down onto the concrete. The same goes for the entirety of the Ukraine-Russian war. The Western media starts the story of the war at February 24th, 2022, which is definitely not when this conflict started. They leave out the 2014 coup of the democratically elected Ukraine government orchestrated by the CIA in conjunction with Ukraine Nazis. They leave out the fact that the Russian-speaking ethnic population in the eastern part of Ukraine, known as the Donbass, didn't want to go along with the CIA Nazi coup government. And so the newly coup right-wing Ukraine government started shelling the citizens of the Donbass via their henchmen, known as the Nazi Azov Battalion, that ended up killing somewhere around 18,000 civilians in the Donbass. They leave out also there was a peace agreement that was reached to end the shelling by the Ukraine government and the Nazi Azov Battalion, known as the Minsk Accord, because the people who broke that peace agreement was not Russia, but the Ukraine government and the Nazis. They leave out the fact that there was already an overall peaceful way to avoid war and the slaughter of hundreds of thousands of precious Ukrainians, which was recently admitted to by the Secretary General of NATO, who admitted that it was the expansion of NATO onto Russia's border that was the real prevarication, and the US and NATO refused to stop their expansion onto Russia's border. All this amnesia is necessary for the continued aggression and warmongering of the US and NATO to be accepted by the citizens of the United States and Europe. Well, I'm here to cure them of their amnesia and remind them of the true cause of not only the Nord Stream bombing, but of the entire Ukraine war and the destabilization of the Middle East, including Libya, Iraq, Afghanistan, and Syria.
Libya.
The reason for that is the imperialistic lust of the United States empire. The US now has over 800 military bases around the world without being able to cite an actual threat to their sovereignty. The US is now ending its empire the way all empires end, by overextending itself militarily while it starves its own people at home. The real threat is the threat of US economic interests. The US has for decades feared German engineering and capital joining Russia's natural resources and manpower. As elucidated very clearly by the founder of the US intelligence firm Stratford, George Friedman, in his 2010 book, says, quote, Russia does not threaten America's global position, but the mere possibility that it might collaborate with Europe and particularly Germany opens up the most significant threat in a decade, a long-term threat that needs to be nipped in the bud. Therefore, maintaining a powerful wedge between Germany and Russia is of overwhelming interest to the United States. For the US, Friedman added in 2015, the primordial fear is German technology and German capital, combining with Russian natural resources and Russian manpower to form the only combination that has for centuries scared the hell out of the United States. In this showdown, the US aims to control the line from the Baltics to the Black Sea. Russia, by contrast, must have at least a neutral Ukraine, not a pro-Western Ukraine, because a neutral Ukraine would impede the primordial US goal of a Russian-German fissure. The US has opted for a proxy war instead. The Western governments are silent, even as the US says through anonymous sources that Ukraine is responsible for the Nord Stream attack, but they won't blame them publicly. And so the United States continues to arm Ukraine to the teeth in hopes of extending the war and avoiding peace. The Germans say it's Ukraine, but will not release their official investigation and will not make an announcement. The final obscenity is that the people in the West who claim to be environmentalists and claim to care about climate change and the environment say nothing about the worst release of methane gas in human history, but in fact, whose actions reveal they don't actually care about climate change and continue to support this war and its eco-terrorism. In a bizarre twist, even Greta Thunberg traveled to Ukraine to meet with Zelensky after the Nord Stream bombing. Thank you for allowing me to speak.
Well, thoughts?
I mean, as I said earlier, I'm not sure the implication, if this will mean anything, him speaking at the UN, if this is going to, but he spoke there.
Yeah.
The money is there.
Sorry, Greta, don't worry about it.
And it's like, I don't understand this Jimmy hate, because look, I say to people, 90% of the population do not know the fuck who Jimmy Dore is, right? So why are you trying to feature him? Like every drama deal thing related to Jimmy Dore, why you have to feature him in any of his content? But like, if you're gonna do that, be consistent. Like, we criticized Jimmy here. We criticized him in the last segment, somewhat. You know, I criticized him, and funny enough, the criticism that I get, Jimmy, is what gets pulled, you know, on other channels to use.
Yeah.
You know, but here is Jimmy actually doing something, you know, speaking truth to power at the UN, you know, whether or not you agree with the absolute implications of that, like, he spoke there and he spoke the truth. And all these channels, crickets. Like, Jimmy is good for views and clicks when it's related to drama, but he's not good for views and clicks in terms of him doing actual important shit. So, and you can make criticisms of anybody, like hell, you can make criticisms of us, you know, but at least be consistent. Like, if you're going to talk about the bad shit, at least try, and I would hope that you're able to be principled enough and kind of talk about the good shit. Like, we generally do that, even with politicians that we despise. Like, if they do good shit, we will talk about the good shit.
Just not a lot going around.
Like,
yeah,
it's not a lot, and even that, it may be like a crumb.
Yeah,
you know, but we're able to balance that. So I don't know. It's just maddening to me that, you know, this will not get any play versus, oh, Jimmy makes extra money from this funder and he gets like, however, like a buff or what. Like, who cares?
Well,
like, this is the stuff that should be trending, not the other shit.
Jimmy mentioned Seymour Hersh. You know, so it sounds like someone's been reading some articles.
Well, looks like we got ourselves a reader.
So Seymour Hersh also wrote a follow-up here recently that came out. So Seymour writes, I do not know much about covert CIA operations. No outsider can, but I do understand that the essential component of all successful missions is total deniability. The American men and women who moved undercover in and out of Norway in the months it took to plan and carry out the destruction of 3 of the 4 Nord Stream pipelines in the Baltic Sea a year ago left no traces other than a boot. They left a boot. It was their boot. I don't care who says it. That was their fucking boot. But not a hint of the team's existence other than a boot. They left a boot. Other than the success of their mission.
By the way, we have a clip.
Google Das Boot in our YouTube, and you'll find what we're talking about. So, deniability as an option for President Joe Biden and his foreign policy advisors was paramount. No significant information about the mission was put on a computer, but instead, typed on a Royal or perhaps the Smith Corona typewriter with a carbon copy of 2, as if the internet and the rest of the online world had yet to be invented. The White House was isolated from the going-ons near Oslo. Can you imagine, like, Joe Biden checking his email? No? Neither can I.
Biden doesn't check. Like,
What do you think? He's probably got like a hot fucking, what is it? Hotmail? I mean, he's got a Hotmail, or a Netscape. Let's go with a Netscape email, right? The White House was isolated from the goings-on near Oslo. Various reports and updates from the field were directly provided to CIA Director Bill Burns, who was the only link between the planners and the president, who authorized the mission to take place on September 26 of 2022. Once the mission was completed, the typed papers and carbons were destroyed, thus leaving no physical trace, no evidence to be dug up later by a special prosecutor or a presidential historian. You could call it the perfect crime. There was a flaw, a gap in understanding between those who carried out the mission and President Biden as to why he ordered the destruction of the pipelines when he did. My initial 52,000-word report, 5,200-word report, published in early February, ended cryptically by quoting an official with knowledge of the mission telling me it was a beautiful cover story. The official added the only flaw was the decision to do it. This is the first account of the flaw on the one-year anniversary of the explosions, and it is one President Biden and his national security team will not like. Inevitably, my initial story caused a sensation, but the major media emphasized the White House denials and relied on an old canard, my reliance on an unnamed source. To join the administration in debunking the notion that Joe Biden could have had anything to do with such an attack, I must note here that I've won literally scores of prizes in my career for stories in the New York Times and the New Yorker that relied on not a single named source. In the past year, we've seen a series of contrary newspaper stories with no named first-hand sources claiming that a dissident Ukrainian group carried out the technical diving operation attack in the Baltic Sea via a 49-foot rented yacht called the Andromeda. I am now able to write about the unexplained flaw cited by the unnamed official. It goes once again to the classic issue of what the CIA is all about, an issue raised by Richard Helms, who headed the agency during the tumultuous years of the Vietnam War and the CIA's secret spying on Americans as ordered by President Lyndon Johnson and sustained by Richard Nixon. I published and Obama and Bush and just keep going, all of them since. I published an expose in the Times about that spying on December 1974 that led to unprecedented hearings by the Senate into the role of agency in an unsuccessful attempt authorized by President John F. Kennedy to assassinate Cuba's Fidel Castro. Helms told the senators that the issue was whether he, as a CIA director, worked for the Constitution or for the Crown in the person of Presidents Johnson and Nixon. The Church Committee left the issue unresolved, but Helms made it clear he and his agency worked for the top man in the White House. Back to the Nord Stream pipelines, it is important to understand that no Russian gas is flowing to Germany. I've heard another big man in the White House talked about by Hunter Biden. Didn't he say that as well? Yes. Something along those lines.
Yes.
So, yeah, top man in the White House, not big man, but close enough. Back to the Nord Stream pipelines, it is important to understand that no Russian gas was flowing to Germany through the Nord Stream pipelines. When Biden ordered them blown up last September 26, Nord Stream 1 has been supplying vast amounts of low-cost natural gas to Germany since 2011 and helped bolster Germany's status as a manufacturing and industrial colossus, but it was shut down by Putin at the end of August 2022 as the Ukraine war was at best in a stalemate. Nord Stream 2 was completed in September 2021, but was blocked from delivering gas by the German government headed by Chancellor Olaf Scholz 2 days prior to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. So you got that? So Putin already shut down one end, right? And the Germans shut down the other end on this Nord Stream 2, right? So given Russia's vast stores of natural gas and oil, American presidents since John F. Kennedy have been alert to the potential weaponization of these natural resources for political purposes. That view remains dominant among Biden and his hawkish foreign policy advisors, Secretary of State Antony Blinken, National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, and Victoria Nuland, now the acting deputy to Blinken. Sullivan convened a series of high-level national security meetings late in 2021 as Russia was building up its forces along the border of Ukraine, with an invasion seen as almost inevitable. The group, which included representatives from the CIA, was urged to come up with a proposal for action that could serve as a deterrent to Putin. The mission to destroy the pipelines was motivated by the White House determination to support President Volodymyr Zelensky. Sullivan's goal seemed clear. The White House policy was to deter Russia from an attack, the official told me. The challenge it gave to the intelligence community was to come up with a way that was powerful enough to do that and to make a strong statement of American capability. So, right up here, right? This zone. So, just in case people needed to know where this was, right? It goes from Vielbjörg, I guess, all the way through the fucking Northwest Passage up here, you know. So right into Germany, right? Everything else is going through Belarus, Ukraine, Crimea, you know, all this zone. But Hirsch continues, I now know what I did not know then, the real reason why the Biden administration brought up taking out the Nord Stream pipeline. The official recently explained to me that at the time, Russia was supplying gas and oil throughout the world via more than a dozen pipelines. But Nord Stream 1 and 2 ran directly from Russia through the Baltic Sea to Germany. The administration put Nord Stream on the table because it was the only one we could access, and it would be totally deniable. Okay? So the official said, we solved the problem within a few weeks by early January and told the White House our assumption was that the president would see the threat against Nord Stream as a deterrent to avoid the war. It was no surprise to the agency's secret planning group when on January 27th, the assured and confident Nuland, then Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs, strictly warned Putin that if he invaded Ukraine, as he clearly was planning to, that one way or another, Nord Stream 2 will not move forward. The line attracted enormous attention, but the words preceding the threat did not. The official State Department transcript shows that she preceded her threat by saying that with regard to the pipeline, we continue to have very strong and clear conversations with our German allies. Okay? So keep all this in your little Rolodex of stuff. Asked by a reporter how she could say with certainty that the Germans would go along because what the Germans have said publicly doesn't match what you're saying. Nuland responded with an astonishing bit of double talk. Nuland says, I would say go back and read the document that we signed in July that made very clear about the consequences for the pipeline if there's further aggression on Ukraine by Russia. But that agreement, which was briefed to journalists, did not specify threats or consequences, according to reports in the Times, Post, and Reuters. At the time of agreement on July 21st, Biden told the press corps that since the pipeline was 99% finished, the idea that anything was going to be said or done was going to stop it was not possible. At the time, Republicans, led by Senator Ted Cruz of Texas, depicted Biden's decision to permit the Russian gas to flow as a generational geopolitical win for Putin and a catastrophe for the United States and its allies. So, 2 weeks after Nuland's statement on February 7th at a joint White House press conference with the visiting Schultz, Biden signaled that he had changed his mind and was joining Nuland and other equally hawkish foreign policy aides in talking about stopping the pipeline. If Russia invades, that means tanks and troops crossing the border of Ukraine again, he said. There will no longer be a Nord Stream 2. We will bring an end to it. Asked how he could do so since the pipeline was under Germany's control, he said, we will, I promise you, we'll be able to do it. Schultz asked the same question, said, we are acting together. We are absolutely united, and we will not be taking different steps. We will do the same steps, and they will be very, very hard to Russia, and they should understand. The German leader was considered then and now by some members of the CIA team to be fully aware of the secret planning underway to destroy the pipelines. By this point, the CIA team has made the necessary contracts in Norway, whose Navy and Special Forces commands have a long history of sharing covert operations with the agency. Norwegian sailors and nasty-class patrol boats helped smuggle American sabotage operatives into North Vietnam in the 1960s, when America in both the Kennedy and Johnson admins was running an undeclared American war there. With Norway's help, the CIA did its job and found a way to do what the Biden White House wanted done to the pipelines. At the time, the challenge in the intelligence community was to come up with a plan that would be forceful enough to deter Putin from the attack on Ukraine. The official told me, "We did it. We found an extraordinary deterrent because of its economic impact on Russia, and Putin did it despite the threat. It took months of research and practice in the churning waters of the Baltic Sea by the two expert U.S. Navy deep-sea divers recruited for the mission before it was deemed to go. Norway's superb seamen found the right spot for planting the bombs that would blow up the pipelines." Senior officials in Sweden and Denmark, who still insist they had no idea what was going on in their shared territorial waters, turned a blind eye to the activities of the American and Norwegian operatives. The American team of divers and support staff on the mission's mothership, a Norwegian minesweeper, would be hard to hide while the divers were doing their work. The team would not learn until after the bombing that Nord Stream 2 had been shut down with 750 miles of natural gas in it. What I did not know then, but was told recently, was that after Biden's extraordinary public threat to blow up Nord Stream 2, with Schultz standing next to him, the CIA planning group was told by the White House that there would be no immediate attack on the two pipelines, but the group should arrange to plant the necessary bombs and be ready to trigger them on demand. After the war began, it was then that we, the small planning group that was working in Oslo with the Royal Norwegian Navy and Special Services on the project, understood that the attack on the pipelines was not a deterrent because as the war went on, we never got the command. Right? So he's saying these had been there for a minute. After Biden's order to trigger the explosives planted on the pipelines, it took only a short flight with a Norwegian fighter and the dropping of an altered off-the-shelf sonar device at the right spot in the Baltic Sea to get it done. By then, the CIA group had long disbanded. By then, too, the official told me, we realized that the destruction of the two Russian pipelines was not related to the Ukraine war. Putin was in the process of annexing the 4 Ukrainian oblasts he wanted, but was part of a neocon political agenda to keep Schultz in Germany, with winter coming up and the pipelines shut down from getting cold feet and opening up. Okay? So they're wanting Germany to not engage, essentially. The shuttered Nord Stream 2, the white, right. So the ones that they had closed, like don't open the second one, right? This stops you from doing that. The White House fear was that Putin would get Germany under his thumb and then he was going to get Poland. Sounds familiar. The White House said nothing as the world wondered who committed the sabotage, so the president struck a blow against the economy of Germany and Western Europe. I mean, literally. Like, this is Biden terrorizing Europe. The official told me he could have done it in June and told Putin, we told you what we would do. The White House silence and denials were, he said, a betrayal of what we were doing. If you are going to do it when it would have made a difference. Right? So the leadership of the CIA team viewed Biden's misleading guidance for its order to destroy the pipelines, the official told me, as taking a strategic step towards World War III. What if Russia had responded by saying, you blew up our pipelines and I'm going to blow up your pipelines and your communication cables? Nord Stream was not a strategic issue for Putin. It was an economic issue. He wanted to sell gas. He'd already lost his pipelines. When the Nord Stream 1 and 2 were shut down before the Ukraine war began. So both of those were shut down. So, within days of the bombing, officials in Denmark and Sweden announced they would conduct an investigation. They reported 2 months later that there had indeed been an explosion and said there would be further inquiries. None has emerged. The German government conducted an inquiry but announced that major parts of its findings would be classified. Last winter, German authorities allocated $286 billion in subsidies to major corporations and homeowners who faced higher energy bills to run the businesses and warm their homes. The impact is still being felt today, with a colder winter expected in Europe. So President Biden waited 4 days before calling the pipeline bombing a deliberate act of sabotage. He said now the Russians are pumping out disinformation about it. Sullivan, who chaired the meetings that led to the proposal to covertly destroy the pipelines, was asked at a later press conference whether the Biden admin now believes that Russia was likely responsible for the act of sabotage. Sullivan's answer, undoubtedly practice, was, well, first, Russia has done what it frequently does when it's responsible for something, which is make accusations that it was really someone else who did it. We've seen this repeatedly over time. Sounds like projection to me. But the president was also clear today that there is more work to do on the investigation before the United States government is prepared to make an attribution in this case. He continued, we will continue to work with our allies and partners to gather all of the facts, and then we will make a determination about where we go from there. Except you couldn't even find a fucking boot. I could find no instances when Sullivan was subsequently asked by someone in the American press about the results of his determination, nor could I find any evidence that Sullivan or the president has been queried since then about the results of the determination about where to go. There is no evidence that President Biden has required the American intelligence community to conduct a major, all-source inquiry into the pipeline bombing. Such requests are known as taskings and are taken seriously inside the government. All of this explains why a routine question I posed a month or so after the bombing to someone with many years in the American intelligence community led me to a truth that no one in America or Germany seems to want to pursue. My question was simple. Who done it, Collin? The Biden administration blew up the pipeline, but the action had little to do with winning or stopping the war in Ukraine, and it resulted from fears in the White House that Germany would waver and turn on the flow of Russian gas, and that Germany and then NATO, for economic reasons, would fall under the sway of Russia and its extensive and inexpensive natural resources, and thus followed the ultimate fear that America would lose its long-standing primacy in Western Europe. Seymour Hersh is a reader-supported publication. To receive new posts and support my work, consider becoming a free or paid subscriber. It's over there on Substack. Links are in the description below for that. If you want to go do that. So, you know, well, yeah. What do you think, Collin?
I mean, we've talked about this before.
Yep.
Different stories, but I don't know. It's first, there was a lot to kind of take in, but
yes, there's a lot going on with all of this story. So, you know,
but essentially, what it boils down to is, you know, the U.S. wanted leverage from Russia and are willing to bomb the Nord Stream pipeline and essentially, in a way, fuck over Europe in order to do it.
Yeah.
And have lied about it. Well, the administration has lied about it since. The media, I think, has been a little more now in penance, basically saying, yeah, it's the U.S.
Yeah.
So
we said it. Like, we said it was us.
Right.
In no less words. And then we're going, no, well, it was Ukraine. Oh, was it now? Okay. But it's not about what we said it was going to be. That's the whole thing, too. It's that we lied to the Norwegians, too. Like, and they helped us set this up to be a deterrent. And then we just waited for the war to happen anyway. And now NATO had a giant advantage of keeping their allies. you know, because what we all know why they sanction. It's to fight economic wars, right? Which Russia, even at the time, we were saying like, oh, winter's coming, you know, and conveniently those pipelines blow up right about that time, to where Germany's then forced to pay us to keep the lights on at an exorbitant rate. So, and it forced them to not engage with the cheaper Russians. So, you know, but yeah, just America doing America stuff as always. So let us know in the comments who you think did it. You know, try to get some engagement on these clips. You know, so
which people have been good about, honestly. So
yep.
Crab says it was him.
Yeah,
he blew up.
Yes, we also have. We'll get to that in a second. We have a cup that you can get on our merch store. But coming up next week, what do we got coming up?
Let's see. You're here. You're INN right now.
Yep.
So tomorrow. So note the slight change. We're gonna have No One Wants to Work Anymore with Indy and Himbo.
Gotcha.
At 10:30. That's pre-recorded, correct?
Yes, it is.
So it's a
they did
pre-recorded,
that like last night.
Yeah, so it's pre-recorded, but I think our members are able to view it early.
Yeah.
So that's more reason to
be a member.
Remember, you get to watch. At least that's one of the perks right now. We'll work on more.
Yeah.
Friday afternoon at 2:15, we have Angel in the afternoon.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep.
No, nothing on Saturday. Hopefully Bitch will be back soon. Missy's taking
There might be. Keep an eye on Saturdays coming up.
We did have Rando Roundtable this past Saturday, though, which a lot of you watched. I guess you guys really enjoy a lot of us coming together and shooting the shit. So, which makes sense. So appreciate you guys watching last Saturday night. But yeah, watch on our Twitter, our main Twitter feed, and see if something pops off Saturday. Sunday. It's the return of How Do We Miss That with you and Indy.
Yep.
So you guys are coming back. So that means both you guys. Well, I don't want to say no one cares about what Indy preps, because, but we know that most of y'all care about boats.
Yeah.
So boats will be back.
I have stuff prepped from this whole month, so it should be a doozy. You know,
right?
So,
and then next Monday, I assume Politically Homeless will be on there. Crab, let us know.
Yeah.
If you guys be back on Monday, probably won't be anything on Tuesday since Jesse was live with American Edition yet last night.
Yeah.
And then, assuming nothing happens, we'll be back here for INN News next Wednesday night at 9. And yeah, let us know. I'm actually thinking in terms of guests that we can have on before the end of the year. So let us know in the comments, or let us know on Twitter which guests you would like to see before the end of the year or after the new year. Which, yeah, Reef and I are still trying to figure out who we want to get on.
Thank you. We appreciate you joining.
66.
I'll have to add you to the list. Indy wants to confuse you and tell you that there's more than one URL to go to when you can go to indienews.shop. He's got that in the chat for you there. You can buy yourself this Look at that. Joe Biden, the Nord Stream destroyer. Look at that little cup. But yeah, appreciate everyone showing up. If you didn't catch all the stories, rewind. Go back.
Go back.
Wait for the clips. Watch those.
Yeah,
share those with your friends.
We should have clips out starting on, if everything goes according to plan, we should have clips out starting on Saturday for the weekend and into Tuesday. That's generally, I guess, for us, our schedule for clips. So,
yep. Works for me.
Let us know. It's been great that I've been actually finding more independent articles written by you all. So let us know if there's a story that you've written, or you've had a friend, or you feel that's good to be highlighted. Let us know that too. We love to
check out the INN Substack. I think Indy probably has a article on it now. On Rumble. Go read that.
I don't think he has it out yet, but we'll.
I think he put it out. He put it out on Twitter. If you go check his Twitter.
Put it out yet?
Yeah, I saw him do it the other day.
Okay. No, he said not yet.
Yeah, I thought you said you did publish the Rumble one, weirdo. It's on his Substack. He just hasn't put it to Indie News Substack, I guess. Well, that should have been the same time thing. Whatever.
I'm sure he's going to talk about that on Sunday.
So yeah, so I do believe so. So he put it in the chat for people to go read. So get caught up before Sunday. But yeah, anything else? I think that's just about it.
That's it. I'm tired.
Yeah, me too.
It's been a long show, but good show.
Good show. Appreciate you, everyone, sticking with us. But anyway, as always, kids, labels are bad. Stay independent. Good night, fam.
Have a good week, everyone.
We want to talk right down to earth in a language that everybody here can easily understand.
Bye, have a great time.